You take one more step past this gate, and I promise you, you will leave this property in the back of a police car. The man blocking the entrance stood 6'3", 240 pounds, a former lacrosse midfielder whose body had thickened but not softened. He wore a navy blazer with brass buttons and a smile that said he'd already won whatever this was. Behind him, the Pemberton estate stretched across 4 acres of manicured Georgia lawn. White tents, string lights, a valet station where Audis and Benz lined up like polished dominoes. 200 guests were expected tonight for the annual Pemberton Legacy Foundation Gala, a charity event that raised 6 figures every spring and spent most of it on the party itself. The man at the gate had not asked for an invitation, had not asked for a name, had looked at the person standing on the other side of the wrought iron, a black man in a gray sport coat and worn leather shoes, holding a single envelope, and made every decision that mattered before a word was spoken. A woman called 911 14 minutes earlier. The Chatham County dispatch log would later record the call at 6:22 p.m., April 11th. Caller identified as Noelle Pemberton, 26, reporting, and the transcript would use her exact words, "A black male attempting to enter a private residence without authorization, possibly armed. Please send someone quickly." The black male was not armed. The private residence had sent him a written invitation, and the woman who called 911 was the same woman who had signed that invitation. She just hadn't expected him to actually come. If this story already has you hooked, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Tomorrow's episode is one you will not want to miss. The man in the gray sport coat was Marcus Ellison, 34 years old. Born Marcus Pemberton, a name he had not used since he was 9, when the family that had adopted him decided he was more trouble than the tax deduction was worth, and returned him to the Chatham County Department of Family and Children's Services, like an appliance that didn't match the kitchen. He had been with the Pembertons for 3 years, long enough to learn which fork went where, long enough to learn that the guest bathroom was for guests who looked like guests, and that he should use the one near the laundry room, long enough to memorize the layout of a house that would later appear in Savannah Magazine's Historic Homes issue, the same house now glowing behind the man who was threatening to have him arrested for approaching it. The Pembertons had adopted Marcus when he was 6, a decision driven less by compassion than by the social pressure exerted on Harland Pemberton Sr. by his late wife, Eugenia. Eugenia had believed in causes, had sat on boards, had written checks to organizations with words like uplift and opportunity in their names. Adopting a black child from the foster system was, in her circle, the ultimate expression of philanthropic commitment, a living, breathing receipt for generosity that could be displayed at garden parties and church luncheons. When Eugenia died of pancreatic cancer 18 months after the adoption, the receipt lost its purpose. Harland Sr. kept Marcus for another 1.5 years, mostly because returning a child required paperwork that competed with his golf schedule, before concluding that the boy was not a good fit for the family dynamic. The phrase appeared in the relinquishment documents filed with the county. Not a good fit. Marcus remembered the day. April. Warm. A Tuesday. He remembered the SpongeBob backpack they let him keep and the shoes that were half a size too small because no one had bought him new ones since Eugenia's funeral. He remembered Vivian, 12 years old, standing at the top of the staircase, watching him leave. She hadn't waved, hadn't cried, had said only one thing, pitched low enough that the social worker wouldn't hear, but loud enough to reach the boy on the landing below. "Mom said you weren't really ours." 25 years later, Vivian Pemberton Hale had sent him an invitation to the family gala. Thick cream cardstock, embossed gold lettering, his name written in calligraphy that probably cost more per letter than the foster homes spent on his monthly food allowance. The invitation included a handwritten note at the bottom, Vivian's looping script. "We'd love to celebrate family, all family, at this year's event. It's time." Marcus had stared at that note for 4 days, had turned it over in his hands the way he turned over evidence, carefully, looking for what was underneath the surface. He was not naive, had not been naive since approximately age 9, when the world taught him that love was a conditional contract subject to cancellation without notice. He knew the invitation was not about reconciliation, knew that celebrate family meant something different when the family had legally abandoned you, but he went anyway. Not because he believed in their sincerity, because he had spent 25 years building a life that existed entirely outside their awareness, and some part of him, the part that still remembered being 9, still remembered the SpongeBob backpack and the 2 small shoes, wanted to stand in that house one more time, wanted to see if the hallway still smelled like lemon furniture polish, wanted to know if the laundry room bathroom still had the cracked tile near the baseboard that he used to trace with his finger during the long hours when the rest of the family was doing things that didn't include him. He drove from Washington, D.C. to Savannah in 7 hours, checked into a Holiday Inn on Abercorn Street, pressed his only sport coat with the hotel iron, put on the leather shoes he'd bought at a thrift store in Georgetown 2 years ago. Good quality, barely worn, the kind of shoes that said employed but not ostentatious. Tucked a small leather-bound notebook into his inside breast pocket. The notebook went everywhere with him, had gone everywhere with him for 11 years. Its pages were dense with small, precise handwriting, observations, timestamps, procedural notes, the accumulated record of a professional life spent paying attention to details that most people overlooked. He arrived at the Pemberton estate at 6:18 p.m., 4 minutes before Noel called 911. The man blocking the gate was Cord Pemberton, Vivian's husband, who ran the Pemberton family trust with the competence of a man who had married into money and confused proximity to wealth with the possession of skill. Cord had played lacrosse at Emory, graduated with a business degree he rarely used, and entered the family through Vivian the way a pilot fish enters a shark's orbit, useful enough to tolerate, dependent enough to control. Cord did not know Marcus, had married into the family 8 years after Marcus was returned to foster care, knew only what Vivian had told him, which was that the family had once tried to help a disadvantaged child, and that it didn't work out. The narrative Vivian constructed erased Marcus's name, his 3 years in the house, his existence as a person rather than a project. In Cord's understanding, the adopted child was a footnote, a brief, unsuccessful experiment in charity that the family preferred not to discuss. So, when a black man in a gray sport coat appeared at the gate holding an envelope, Cord saw what he expected to see, someone who didn't belong. "I have an invitation." Marcus held up the envelope. His voice was level, calm, the kind of calm that comes not from absence of emotion, but from years of practice containing it. Cord didn't look at the envelope. "This is a private event, invitation only, which is why I'm holding an invitation." Cord stepped forward, closed the distance between them until the wrought iron was the only thing separating his chest from Marcus's face. His right hand gripped one of the gate's vertical bars, knuckles whitening, the casual threat of a man who understood that physical size was its own argument. "Sir, I don't know how you got that, but I'm going to need you to step back from the gate." Marcus lowered the envelope, studied the man in front of him with an attention to detail that seemed excessive for the situation, eyes tracking from the blazer's brass buttons to the security earpiece to the slight bulge of a phone in the breast pocket. He noted the 2 cameras mounted on the stone pillars flanking the gate, one angled toward the driveway, one covering the entrance. He noted the timestamp display on the camera facing him, 6:19 p.m., blinking green, and filed it. "My name is Marcus Ellison. I was invited by Vivian Pemberton Hale. The invitation is dated March 28th. If you look at it, you'll see her signature." Cord's jaw tightened. The name meant nothing to him. But the calm did something. Calm from a black man at a gate was, in Cord's experience, unusual enough to be suspicious. People who didn't belong were supposed to be nervous, were supposed to stammer, apologize, leave. This man was doing none of those things. Was standing with the kind of stillness that suggested he had been in rooms, or at gates, where his presence was questioned before, and had learned that the questioning said more about the questioner than the questioned. "Wait here." Cord pulled out his phone, dialed, waited. Viv, there's a man at the gate saying you invited him. Name's Ellison. Pause. Black guy, gray jacket. Another pause. Longer this time. Then Cord's expression shifted. Not softening exactly, but rearranging into something more complex. Surprise. Confusion. And underneath both, a flicker of something that looked like disappointment, as if he'd been hoping for a simpler resolution. He lowered the phone. She says to let you in. The gate opened. Cord did not step aside, made Marcus turn sideways to pass, their shoulders nearly touching in the gap. A small, petty geometry of dominance that accomplished nothing except to establish that entry was granted, but welcome was not. As Marcus squeezed through, Cord's elbow caught him in the ribs. Not hard, not enough to cause injury, just enough to hurt, just enough to say I could do more. Marcus absorbed the contact without breaking stride. Filed it. 6:21 p.m. Physical contact initiated by Cord Pemberton. Elbow to right rib cage, consistent with deliberate obstruction of passage. The gravel crunched under his thrift store shoes. The estate was exactly as he remembered it, except more. More landscaped, more lit, more populated by people who wore their wealth like a second skin, effortlessly, unconsciously, the way fish wear water. He passed the fountain that Eugenia had imported from a villa in Tuscany, past the rose garden where he used to hide when the house felt too large and too empty and too full of people who looked through him, past the spot near the oak tree where he had buried a toy soldier when he was 7, a ritual he'd invented to feel like something of his existed in this place permanently, even if he didn't. The toy soldier was probably still there, 3 inches underground, waiting for someone who wasn't coming back, except he had. He followed the gravel path toward the main tent, where the gala was already underway. A string quartet played something classical he couldn't name. Waiters in white jackets circulated with champagne flutes and canapes that were more architecture than food. He counted the guests, force of habit, and estimated between 180 and 200. He was the only black person who was not holding a serving tray. A waiter approached with a tray of champagne, glanced at Marcus, kept walking without offering. The waiter served 3 other guests within the next 10 seconds, all white, all within the same radius, then returned to the kitchen. It was a small thing, the kind of thing that could be coincidence, the kind of thing that was almost never coincidence. Marcus found the bar, ordered water. The bartender looked surprised, not at the order, at the person placing it. His eyes flickered to Marcus's sport coat, his shoes, the absence of any visual marker that would explain his presence among guests whose combined net worth could fund a small country. "You with the catering company?" "I'm a guest." The bartender poured the water, set it on the bar with a paper napkin, did not make eye contact again. "Well, you actually came." Vivian Pemberton Hale materialized from a cluster of women near the entrance, all of whom turned to look at Marcus with the coordinated curiosity of a flock changing direction. Vivian was 37 now, blonde hair pulled tight, wearing a gown that cost more than Marcus's car. She smiled, and the smile had the structural perfection of something that had been practiced in mirrors, all surface, no foundation. "Marcus, it's been so long." She extended a hand, not for a handshake, but for the kind of limp-fingered clasp that society women offered to people they considered beneath embracing. "Everyone, this is Marcus. He's family. Sort of." The cluster of women murmured. The sort of hung in the air like a verdict. Marcus took her hand briefly. "Thank you for the invitation, Vivian." Of course. We've been meaning to reconnect for years, haven't we?" She looked at the women around her for confirmation, and they nodded in the way people nod when they don't know what they're confirming, but understand that agreement is expected. Come, let me introduce you to everyone. Cord will get you a drink." "Cord?" She looked past Marcus toward the gate, where Cord was watching from a distance with his arms crossed. "Get Marcus something. Beer, or—" She paused, tilting her head. Do you prefer something else? The pause carried weight, a calculation, a decision about what kind of drink a man in a gray sport coat and thrift store shoes would order. Water is fine. Water, how refreshing. She laughed, and the women laughed with her, and the laughter had edges. The first hour was a study in controlled humiliation. Vivian introduced Marcus to guests with a rotation of phrases designed to position him as an object of curiosity rather than a person deserving of ordinary social respect. To the mayor's wife, "This is Marcus. He grew up with us for a little while, our family's attempt at making a difference." To a bank president, "Marcus Ellison, it's complicated. A family project that didn't quite take." To a woman in emerald earrings who turned out to be on the board of the Pemberton Legacy Foundation, "This is our Marcus. We adopted him when he was tiny. Isn't it wonderful he came back?" Each introduction stripped away a layer of personhood and replaced it with narrative. Marcus was not a 34-year-old man with a career and a life and a history that extended far beyond this family. He was a prop, a talking point, evidence of Pemberton generosity displayed for public consumption, like a plaque on a hospital wing or a named bench in a park. Marcus absorbed it, said little, shook hands, nodded, watched. The notebook stayed in his pocket, but his eyes were doing its work, cataloging names, titles, relationships, the architecture of social power that governed this room. He noted who deferred to whom, who avoided whom, which guests looked at him with curiosity and which with something colder. At one point, between introductions, a woman in a pearl necklace and a smile that required effort touched Marcus's arm and said, "You must be so grateful." She said it the way people commented on weather, casually, without expecting disagreement. "You must be so grateful." For what? For being adopted at 6 and returned at 9? For being displayed at a gala like a before photo in a charity brochure? For standing in a room where his presence required an explanation that nobody asked of any other guest? Marcus looked at her. For what, specifically? The woman blinked. The question was unexpected. Gratitude, in her experience, did not require specification. It was a state of being, something that people in Marcus's position were assumed to carry the way they carried their skin color, permanently and without complaint. Well, for everything the Pembertons did for you, taking you in, giving you a chance. They gave me 3 years, then they gave me back. The woman's smile collapsed. She excused herself quickly, the way people leave conversations that threaten their assumptions, and found a cluster of other guests to absorb her. Marcus watched her go, filed the interaction. 7:38 p.m. Unidentified female guest. Assumption of gratitude as default emotional state for formerly fostered individuals. He moved through the tent. A man in a double-breasted suit, Vivian's accountant, someone mentioned, stepped directly into his path, forcing Marcus to stop or collide. The man didn't apologize, didn't acknowledge the near contact, simply occupied the space as if Marcus weren't there, continuing his conversation with a woman beside him about wine futures. Marcus stepped around him. The man's elbow caught Marcus's water glass, knocking it from his hand. It fell to the grass, didn't break, just spilled. And the man glanced down with an expression of mild annoyance, directed not at himself for causing the spill, but at Marcus for being in the position to be spilled upon. "Careful," the man said. One word, directed at the person who had been standing still while being walked into. Marcus picked up the glass, said nothing, got a refill at the bar, returned to his position near the tent's edge. His shoes were wet from the spilled water. His jaw was tight, but his expression remained unchanged, the expression of a man who had learned, years ago, that displaying anger in rooms like this was a luxury he could not afford, because anger from a black man was always interpreted as threat, never as response. He excused himself to find the restroom. A staffer directed him to the main house, the guest bathroom on the first floor, the one near the entrance. Marcus walked through the familiar hallway, the lemon furniture polish. He'd been right. It was still there. The smell pulled memories from compartments he thought he'd sealed. Eugenia's voice reading to him before bed, the only 6 months of his childhood when someone read to him. The sound of Vivian's piano practice, Chopin, always Chopin, drifting up the staircase while he sat alone in the laundry room doing homework on the floor because the dining room table was for family. He found the guest bathroom, used it, washed his hands, noticed the cracked tile near the baseboard, still there, still unrepaired 25 years later, and felt something he refused to name. When he returned to the tent, a man was waiting for him near the bar. Barrett Shaw. She extended a hand, firm, professional, nothing like Vivian's performative clasp. She wore a gray suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent, and an expression that suggested she was accustomed to being the smartest person in any room. "I handle legal affairs for the Pemberton family." "Marcus Ellison?" "I know who you are. Vivian mentioned you might attend." Barrett studied him with the assessing gaze of an attorney evaluating a witness. "So, what do you do, Marcus?" The question was a probe. Marcus recognized the technique. Establish baseline, test for inconsistencies, look for vulnerabilities. "I work in government." "Government. How interesting. Federal? State?" "Federal." "Doing what, exactly?" "Administrative work. Mostly procedural. Filing reviews, compliance assessments, the kind of work that puts people to sleep at parties." Barrett's eyes narrowed slightly. The answer was true, but deliberately vague. A response calibrated to satisfy casual inquiry while revealing nothing. She recognized the calibration. Most people didn't know how to be strategically imprecise. Imprecision was usually a sign of ignorance, but this felt like something else, like discipline. "Administrative work," she repeated. "Well, the government certainly has a lot of administrators." She sipped her champagne. "Vivian tells me you were in the foster system after you left the family." "After the family returned me?" "Yes." The correction was gentle but precise. Barrett registered it. Returned, not left. Active voice assigned to the family, not to the child. This man was choosing his words with the care of someone who understood the difference between narrative and fact. That must have been difficult. It was educational. She waited for elaboration. None came. Marcus stood with his water glass, perfectly still, offering nothing beyond what was asked and receiving everything that was offered, studying Barrett the way she was studying him, except he was better at making the study invisible. "You mentioned procedural work. What kind of procedures?" "The kind that require documentation." He paused. Let the silence do work that words would overcomplicate. "Thorough documentation." Barrett held his gaze for 3 seconds. Then she finished her champagne and smiled. Not warmly, but with the grudging respect one professional gives another when they recognize the skill of deflection. She excused herself, walked back to Vivian, leaned close. "Where did you find him?" "We adopted him 25 years ago. I told you." "I know what you told me. I'm asking where he's been since. Because that man is not a janitor or a bus driver or whatever you imagined. He just deflected 5 questions in a row without revealing a single usable fact. I do that for a living, Vivian. I know what it looks like when someone else does it." Vivian waved a hand. "He works in government. Probably pushes paper at the DMV or some housing office. Does it matter?" "It might." "Barrett, relax. He's here so we can show the board that the Pemberton family stays connected to its charitable roots. We invite him, we take a few photos, we put it in the newsletter. That's all." That was not all. But Barrett didn't know that yet. At 7:45 p.m., Vivian took the stage. The stage was a raised platform at the far end of the main tent, draped in white fabric and flanked by arrangements of white roses that must have cost $2,000 collectively and would be dead by Wednesday. A podium with the Pemberton Legacy Foundation logo. A screen behind it showing a slideshow of the foundation's charitable activities, soup kitchens, school supply drives, habitat builds, all photographed with the soft focus and warm lighting that transformed philanthropy into marketing. "Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the 23rd Annual Pemberton Legacy Gala." Applause. champagne glasses raised. The string quartet went silent. Tonight is about family, about legacy, about the Pemberton commitment to lifting up those who need it most. Vivian smiled. Her teeth were very white. And speaking of lifting up, I want to share something personal tonight, something that shows exactly what the Pemberton spirit means. Marcus was standing near the back of the tent, by the bar, water glass in hand. He felt the shift before he heard his name, felt the room's attention reorganize, the way air pressure changes before a storm. 25 years ago, my mother, God rest her soul, opened our home to a child in need, a young boy from the foster system. She believed that every child deserved a chance, and she gave that chance to a boy named Marcus. 200 heads turned. Some had been told, some guessed. All found him, the only black man standing among the guests rather than serving them. Marcus is here tonight. Marcus, where are you? Come up here. She said it the way you'd call a child to the front of a classroom, bright, commanding, performative, in the way that affection becomes when it's staged for an audience rather than felt by a heart. Come up here, as if his purpose for existing in this room was to stand next to her and validate her family's generosity. He didn't move. Marcus, don't be shy. 200 people were watching. The pressure was architectural. Built into the room, the stage, the lights, the expectation that when a Pemberton summoned, people came. Marcus understood the calculus. Refusing would make him the difficult one, the ungrateful one, the foster child who couldn't even accept a gesture of inclusion without making it awkward. He set down his water glass, walked through the crowd. The path that opened for him was a narrow channel of turned shoulders and shifted feet, people making room but making sure he knew the room was theirs to give. He reached the stage. Vivian put her arm around his shoulders, a gesture that looked warm from the audience but felt like a clamp, her fingers pressing into the fabric of his jacket, holding him in position. Her nails dug into his shoulder through the fabric, not enough to pierce skin, enough to remind him that she was the one who decided where he stood and how long he stayed there. Everyone, this is Marcus Ellison. He was a Pemberton once, and even though life took him in a different direction, we never forgot him. Did we? The crowd murmured approval. A few people clapped. A woman in the second row lifted her phone and took a photo, flash on, capturing Marcus mid-blink, the kind of photo that would look unflattering regardless of the subject, but especially unflattering when the subject was a black man standing next to a blonde woman in a designer gown, the visual contrast communicating everything the caption didn't need to say. Marcus, would you like to say a few words? She handed him the microphone. Another trap. If he spoke, he became part of her performance. If he refused, he became the problem. The microphone was warm from her hand and heavy in his. Thank you, Vivian. His voice was steady, unhurried. It's been a long time. He handed the microphone back. 4 words. Enough to satisfy the moment without feeding the narrative. Vivian's smile flickered. She'd expected more. Expected gratitude, perhaps. Expected the tearful reunion story that would headline the Foundation newsletter. Instead, she got 4 words and a man who refused to perform on command. Isn't he sweet? She recovered quickly, turning back to the audience. That's the Pemberton spirit, everyone. Once family, always family. The applause resumed. Marcus stepped off the stage. His shoulder blades burned from the collective gaze of 200 people who had just been told he was a charity case. He walked back to the bar, picked up his water, and made a note, not in the leather notebook, not yet, but in the precise internal filing system that he had developed over 11 years of professional practice. A system designed to record observations accurately and completely, organized by date, time, speaker, and context. 7:49 p.m., Vivian Pemberton Hale. Public identification of a private individual's foster care history without consent. Audience of approximately 200. Recorded on Foundation's event video system. Camera position stage left. Second camera, rear center. He didn't know yet that the notes would matter, but he made them anyway. the way he always did, the way he'd been trained to do. It was habit, the kind of habit that specific kinds of professionals develop over years of very specific kinds of work. As Marcus returned to his position near the bar, a man in his 60s intercepted him, white-haired, broad-shouldered, wearing a tuxedo with the comfortable ease of someone who wore formal attire the way other people wore bathrobes. He carried a rocks glass and a smile that mixed condescension with curiosity in equal measure. "So you're the one?" He extended a hand. "Hampton Cross, Judge, Chatham County Superior Court, friend of the family. Marcus Ellison." Cross shook his hand, firm, appraising, the kind of handshake that measured the other person rather than greeted them. "Vivian's told me about you over the years. Good to finally put a face to the story." "What story has she told?" Cross tilted his head. The question was direct in a way he wasn't expecting. People didn't usually ask Judge Hampton Cross to specify what he'd been told. People usually let him control the conversation. "Oh, you know, that the family took you in, that things didn't work out, that it was hard on everyone." He sipped his bourbon. "But that's the thing about family, isn't it? You don't get to choose who stays and who goes." "Actually," Marcus said, "someone does get to choose. Someone always chooses." Cross studied him. The answer carried a weight that didn't match the setting. Too precise, too deliberate for cocktail party banter. This was a man making a point. And judges, even retired judges, even judges who spent more time on golf courses than in courtrooms, recognized when points were being made. "Fair enough." Cross stepped closer, lowered his voice. "Listen, between us, Harland was a good man. Your situation was complicated. Eugenia's death threw everything off. Nobody handled it well, but the family did try. The family tried for 18 months after Eugenia died. Then they filed relinquishment paperwork and drove me to a county office. The caseworker's name was Gloria. She gave me a juice box." Marcus paused. "I remember thinking juice boxes were for little kids, and I was 9, but I drank it anyway because nobody had offered me anything else that day." The detail, the juice box, the age, the caseworker's name, landed with a specificity that made Cross uncomfortable. These were not the broad strokes of a man telling a familiar sad story. These were the precise recollections of someone who remembered because remembering was part of how he survived. Cross cleared his throat. "Well, ancient history. Tonight's about looking forward." He clapped Marcus on the shoulder, hard, the way men of a certain generation express something between affection and dominance. "Enjoy the party." He walked away. Marcus rubbed the shoulder. The bruise from cord was on the left. Cross's handprint would fade from the right. 2 shoulders, 2 marks. 2 men who thought that touch was a form of communication they were entitled to. The second sister arrived at 8:15 p.m. But before Noel appeared, Marcus had one more encounter that would matter. He was walking back from the restroom through the hallway that connected the main house to the back terrace when he found Cord waiting, leaning against the wall, bourbon in hand, blocking the narrow corridor with his body the way he'd blocked the gate, casually, completely, as if the space belonged to him and anyone else's use of it required his permission. "You know what I think?" Cord said. He didn't move. "I think Vivian made a mistake inviting you." Marcus stopped. The hallway was narrow. Cord's body filled it. Going around him meant squeezing past, and the last time Marcus had squeezed past Cord, he'd caught an elbow in the ribs. "I think she felt sorry for you. She does that. Feels sorry for people. It's a weakness." Cord swirled his bourbon. "But this isn't a soup kitchen. This is family. Real family. And you showing up here in that Goodwill jacket pretending you belong—" "The jacket is from a thrift store in Georgetown, not Goodwill, and I'm not pretending anything." Cord set down his bourbon on a hallway table, took a step forward. The space between them compressed to 18 inches. Marcus could see the veins in Cord's neck, the flush across his collarbone that marked the boundary between anger and bourbon. "Here's what's going to happen," Cord said, his voice dropping to a register meant for intimidation. "You're going to finish your water. You're going to say thank you for a lovely evening. And you're going to drive back to wherever you came from and never contact this family again. Are we clear?" "Are you threatening me?" "I'm explaining how this works." Marcus studied him. The proximity was deliberate, designed to trigger either submission or aggression, either of which Cord could use. Submission proved Marcus didn't belong. Aggression proved Marcus was dangerous. There was no third option in Cord's experience, because the men Cord bullied had always chosen one or the other. Marcus chose neither. He pulled the leather notebook from his breast pocket, opened it to a fresh page, clicked a pen. "Could you repeat that? I want to make sure I have the exact phrasing." Cord stared at the notebook, at the pen, at the man who was treating a threat like a deposition. "You're writing this down?" "I write everything down." The answer was true, and the truth of it, the calm, methodical, professional truth, was more unsettling to Cord than any threat or display of anger could have been, because it implied consequence, implied that words spoken in a dark hallway would not stay in a dark hallway, that someone was keeping records, that someone was building something page by page with the patience of a man who understood that documentation was its own form of power. Cord picked up his bourbon, stepped aside, let Marcus pass. But as Marcus moved through the gap, Cord's free hand shot out and shoved Marcus's shoulder, hard, sudden, propelling him forward 2 stumbling steps. Marcus caught himself against the opposite wall, palm flat against the plaster, notebook clutched in the other hand. "Clumsy," Cord said, and walked away. Marcus straightened, wrote in the notebook, 8:12 p.m., hallway between main house and terrace. Cord Pemberton. Verbal threat. Drive back to wherever you came from and never contact this family again. Physical contact. Open palm shove to right shoulder. No witnesses. No camera coverage in this corridor. He closed the notebook, returned it to his pocket, and walked back toward the fountain where Noelle Pemberton was about to make her entrance. Noelle Pemberton was 26, the youngest of the 3 Pemberton children, and she occupied a specific ecological niche in the family, the one who appeared harmless. Where Vivian was polished and commanding and Cord was physical and blunt, Noelle was soft-spoken, wide-eyed, the kind of person strangers described as sweet before they discovered what sweet was hiding. She found Marcus by the fountain, alone, watching the party from a distance the way someone watches a controlled burn, aware that the fire serves a purpose, alert to the possibility that it might not stay controlled. "Marcus? Oh my gosh. I can't believe you're here." She hugged him, quick, tight, the kind of hug that created intimacy whether you wanted it or not. Her arms wrapped around his torso, hands pressing flat against his back, then sliding to his sides as she pulled away. One hand, the left, dropped briefly to his jacket pocket. The contact lasted less than a second, imperceptible to anyone watching, noticed by Marcus because he had spent 11 years noticing things that lasted less than a second. "I'm Noelle. You probably don't remember me. I was only a baby when you were with us." "I remember you." He remembered a crib in the nursery down the hall from the laundry room bathroom, pink blankets, a mobile with elephants, Eugenia holding the baby with the tenderness she never quite managed to direct at the 6-year-old boy sitting on the floor nearby, watching. "This is so exciting. Vivian told me she invited you, and I was like, we have to make this special. You're part of the family." She said it with conviction, absolute, unshakable, the conviction of someone who has never had their family status questioned and therefore cannot imagine what the word means to someone who has. "That's kind of you. Are you enjoying the party? Have you tried the crab cakes? The caterer is from Charleston. She's incredible. She was building rapport, establishing connection, creating a record of friendliness that would serve a purpose later, though Marcus couldn't yet see what that purpose was. He cataloged the interaction the way he cataloged everything, noting tone, word choice, the discrepancy between Noelle's warmth and the 911 call she had placed 53 minutes earlier reporting him as a potential intruder. She didn't know he knew about the call. The dispatch log wouldn't become available until someone filed a formal request. But Marcus had heard the sirens, faint, distant, silenced before they reached the estate because someone had called back and canceled the request. Someone. He'd find out who. Noelle stayed close for 20 minutes. Introduced him to 3 of her friends, all young, all blonde, all trained in the social art of smiling at people they planned to discuss later. During the introductions, Noelle hugged Marcus twice more, each hug a little longer, a little tighter, a little more deliberate in the placement of her hands. Marcus felt the second insertion, something sliding into his left trouser pocket this time, during the final hug. She pressed a small, card-shaped object against his thigh through the fabric, using her forearm as cover while her face stayed pressed against his shoulder in the picture of sibling affection. She took 2 selfies with him, phone angled to capture both their faces, and Marcus noted that she positioned herself slightly in front, ensuring she was the subject and he was the context. At 8:35, she excused herself. "I'll be right back. I need to check on something for the auction." She squeezed his arm and disappeared into the crowd. If you are as curious as I am to see what happens next, make sure you subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you do not miss the next part of this incredible story. Marcus stood by the fountain, alone again. He could feel the weight in both pockets now, the wallet in his jacket, the card in his trousers. He reached into his jacket pocket first, using only his thumb and index finger, touching as little surface area as possible. It was a wallet. Kate Spade, burgundy leather, containing 2 credit cards, a Georgia driver's license belonging to someone named Margot Sterling, $160 in cash, and a folded receipt from a Savannah boutique dated that afternoon. He checked the trouser pocket. A single credit card, American Express, also belonging to Margot Sterling, planted separately, in a different pocket, during a different hug, to eliminate any argument that a single item could have been transferred accidentally. 2 items, 2 pockets, 2 separate acts of placement. Deliberate, systematic, the work of someone who had thought about this in advance. Marcus returned both items to their respective pockets, did not remove them, did not attempt to find their owner. Because he understood, had understood within 3 seconds of recognizing what they were, that these items were not lost. They were placed. And very soon, someone would discover they were missing, and the search would be directed, and the search would find its way to the only person at this gala who did not belong. The trap was elegant. He had to admit that. He moved to a corner of the garden where the lighting was dim and the security cameras, he'd counted 7 so far, did not have direct lines of sight to his hands. He pulled out his phone. Not to call anyone. To open the camera app. He photographed each item in his pocket, the wallet, the credit card, documenting their presence and condition before anyone could accuse him of having used them. Time-stamped by the phone's metadata. 8:38 p.m. Then he returned the phone to his pocket and waited. At 8:52 p.m., the elegant trap activated. "Has anyone seen my wallet?" Margot Sterling's voice carried across the tent with the theatrical projection of a woman accustomed to being heard. She was the society columnist Barrett had been speaking with earlier. Tall, mid-50s, wearing emerald earrings that matched her emerald dress, and an expression that had shifted from composed to indignant in the space of 15 seconds. "I had it in my clutch bag, right here on the table, and now it's gone." She emphasized the word the way prosecutors emphasize evidence, gone, as if the wallet had been kidnapped rather than misplaced. "And my American Express card. It was in my other bag. That's missing too." The dual discovery was important. 2 missing items meant pattern. Pattern meant intent. Intent meant someone at this party was a thief. And the audience, trained by decades of social conditioning to draw specific conclusions about specific kinds of people, knew exactly where to look. 200 pairs of eyes found Marcus. Not all at once, not dramatically, but in the gradual, inevitable way that suspicion flows toward the unfamiliar. One person glanced at him. Then another noticed the first person glancing, then a third, then a cluster, then a wave, until Marcus stood in a spreading circle of attention, holding a glass of water, wearing a gray sport coat with a stolen wallet in one pocket and a stolen credit card in another, and understanding with absolute precision what was about to happen. Cord arrived first. He crossed the tent with the purposeful stride of a man who had been waiting for exactly this kind of justification. 3 of his friends followed. Men in blazers, men who had been drinking since 6, men whose collective body language said this is going to be handled. Marcus. He didn't ask, didn't accuse, just said the name and let the context do the work. Cord. Margot's wallet is missing, and her credit card. I heard. You were standing near her table earlier. I was standing near the bar. The bar is near several tables. Cord moved closer, close enough that Marcus could smell the bourbon on his breath and the cologne on his neck, a rich, aggressive scent that announced its presence the way Cord announced his. I think you should empty your pockets. I don't think I will. The refusal hung in the air. Around them, the gala continued. The string quartet resumed, waiters circulated, conversations buzzed. But within a 10-foot radius, the temperature had dropped. Cord's shoulders squared. His weight shifted forward onto the balls of his feet, the instinctive posture of a man preparing for physical contact. His 3 friends fanned out behind him, blocking the path back to the tent. I'm asking you politely. And I'm declining politely. Marcus did not move, did not step back, did not raise his voice or change his expression. He stood with the stillness of someone who understood that the next 30 seconds would determine the trajectory of the entire evening, and who had decided, consciously, deliberately, with the kind of strategic patience that specific professionals develop over years of very specific work, to let the other person make the first mistake. Cord made it. He reached out and grabbed the lapel of Marcus's sport coat. Not a shove, not a punch, a grab, the kind of physical assertion that men like Cord used to establish dominance in spaces they controlled. His fist closed around the fabric and pulled, twisting Marcus slightly toward him, close enough that their faces were inches apart. I said empty your pockets. Marcus looked down at the fist holding his lapel, looked up at Cord's face, spoke quietly enough that only Cord could hear. You just committed simple battery under Georgia Code Section 16-5-23. There are 4 cameras within visual range of this position. I would suggest removing your hand. The words landed with force, not because of their content. Cord didn't know or care about Georgia Code Section 16-5-23, but because of their precision, the tone, the calmness, the absolute absence of fear. This was not how the script was supposed to go. Cord released the lapel, but his left hand shot forward, flat-palmed, and shoved Marcus backward. Marcus stumbled 2 steps, caught his balance, and felt the gravel shift under his shoes. One of Cord's friends, a thick-necked man in a checkered blazer, moved behind Marcus, blocking his retreat. Marcus's back collided with the man's chest. Hands grabbed his arms from behind, locking them at the elbows. Check his pockets, Cord said. His voice had dropped an octave, the voice of a man who had moved past negotiation into action. Do not touch me. Marcus's voice remained level, controlled, but louder now, loud enough for the nearest guests to hear, loud enough for the cameras. 9:03 p.m. Cord Pemberton and an unidentified male are physically restraining me in the garden area. I am being held against my will. Camera positions 4 and 7 have direct visual coverage of this location. The narration stopped Cord's hand mid-reach. He stared. The friends stared. The thick-necked man holding Marcus's arms loosened his grip slightly, not out of conscience but out of confusion, because people who were about to be robbed didn't narrate the robbery like court reporters. Vivian arrived. Barrett Shaw arrived. And behind Barrett, moving through the crowd with the deliberate gravity of a man who expected rooms to rearrange themselves around his presence, came Judge Hampton Cross. Cross was 63, white-haired, square-jawed, and he had the kind of authority that did not need announcement. He simply appeared, and people deferred. He appeared now, positioning himself at the center of the growing circle around Marcus, and the circle rearranged itself to accommodate his presence. "What's going on here?" "Margot's wallet is missing," Vivian said. "And her credit card. And Marcus was near her table." Cross looked at Marcus. The look was evaluative, practiced, the same look he used on defendants in his courtroom, measuring not guilt, but controllability, whether this person would comply or cause problems. "Young man, if there's been a misunderstanding, the simplest way to resolve it is to show us what's in your pockets." "With respect, sir, I'm not required to submit to a search by a private citizen." Cross's eyebrows rose. "I'm Judge Hampton Cross, Chatham County Superior Court." "That doesn't give you search authority at a private party, Your Honor." Marcus used the title correctly, instinctively, the way someone uses a title when they've spent years in rooms where titles matter. It was a small detail. But Barrett Shaw, standing at the edge of the circle, noticed it. Cross noticed it too. His expression shifted, not softening, but recalibrating. "I've been on the bench 30 years. I know when someone is hiding something. And I've been in enough proceedings to know that personal conviction doesn't constitute probable cause." The word proceedings stopped the conversation. Not proceedings in the casual sense, meetings, events, gatherings. Proceedings in the legal sense, the specific, technical, professional sense. Barrett Shaw's head tilted. Cross's jaw tightened. "Nobody's searching anyone," Barrett intervened, stepping into the circle with professional efficiency. "This is a private event, and if something is missing, we call the police and let them handle it properly. Cord, step back. Judge Cross, with respect, this isn't your courtroom." "I know what my courtroom is, Ms. Shaw." "Then you know that whatever happens here has no evidentiary value without proper procedure." Barrett turned to Marcus. "Mr. Ellison, I'm advising the family. Would you be willing to speak with the police when they arrive? You're not required to, but it would help resolve this quickly." Marcus looked at Barrett, at the circle of faces around him, Vivian's calculating smile, Cord's clenched jaw, the thick-necked friend still hovering behind him, Noel's wide eyes that contained something other than surprise, Cross's judicial scowl. "I have nothing to hide." "Then you won't mind the police." "I don't mind the police. I mind being accused of theft at a party I was invited to attend by the host." The sentence was sharp enough to cut, and the room felt it. Vivian's smile thinned. Cord's jaw clenched tighter. Noel looked down at her phone. Cross folded his arms. "Nobody's accusing you," Vivian said, in the tone of someone who was absolutely accusing him. "We're just trying to find Margot's wallet. If you don't have it, then there's nothing to worry about." Cord didn't wait for the police. He stepped forward again, past Barrett's outstretched arm, past Cross's disapproving frown, and this time he grabbed Marcus's arm, just above the elbow, and yanked him sideways, pulling him away from the tent and toward the garden path that led to the service entrance. The motion was sudden, violent in its casualness, the way a bouncer moves a patron. Functional, impersonal, designed to relocate a body rather than injure it. Marcus's shoulder wrenched. A seam in his sport coat ripped at the armhole, a small, clean tear that wouldn't be visible from a distance, but that he felt against his skin like a line being drawn. His feet scraped across the gravel, one shoe twisting on a stone, ankle rolling painfully before he regained balance. Cord's grip tightened, fingers digging into the muscle of Marcus's arm with the deliberate pressure of a man who wanted the bruise to form. He did not resist, did not pull away, did not strike back. Instead, he spoke. Clearly. Loud enough for the guests within 30 feet to hear. 9:08 p.m. Cord Pemberton has just forcibly seized my left arm and is relocating me against my will from the main event area toward the service entrance. Camera 7, the unit mounted above the garden archway, should have a clear angle on this position. There is a visible tear in my jacket at the left shoulder seam. I am requesting that he release me. Cord stopped. Not because the words made him reconsider, because the words were strange, because normal people, Normal people who had just been grabbed and dragged did not narrate the event with timestamps and camera positions and the calm specificity of an incident report. "What the hell did you just say?" "I said camera 7 should have a clear angle. Would you like me to identify the others?" Cord released him, stepped back, looked at Marcus the way you look at a locked door that you expected to be open, with confusion and the beginning of something that in a more self-aware person might have been caution. Marcus straightened his jacket, noted the tear, noted the time, noted the bruise forming on his arm, separate from the earlier one, a new mark on the same limb. Noted Cord's position relative to the nearest camera. Filed all of it. Barrett Shaw appeared at the garden archway, slightly out of breath, a woman who had moved faster than her heels were designed for. "Cord, I told you to wait for the police. If you assault a guest at a family event while the Foundation's cameras are rolling, do you have any idea what that looks like in a civil complaint? He has Margot's wallet. You don't know that. And even if he does, you just committed battery in front of witnesses and security cameras. Congratulations. You've given his attorney, if he has one, everything they need." Marcus listened to this exchange from 3 feet away, rubbing his shoulder where Cord's grip had left its second bruise of the evening. He said nothing. Let them argue. Let the conflict between Cord's instinct and Barrett's training play out. Because every second they spent arguing was a second of documented behavior that would be relevant later. At 9:11 p.m., the Chatham County Sheriff's Office arrived. 2 deputies, 1 male, 1 female. They had been dispatched in response to Noel's original 911 call, the one about a black male attempting unauthorized entry, which had been canceled but generated a report. When a second call came from the estate's security company reporting a theft in progress, the deputies were already in the area. Deputy Sloan Avery was the senior officer, mid-40s, white, with the weathered face and careful eyes of someone who had worked the Chatham County social circuit long enough to know that disputes among the wealthy required a different kind of policing than disputes among everyone else. She approached the group in the garden with the unhurried authority of someone who understood that in this neighborhood the badge meant less than the relationship. "Evening, Judge Cross, Ms. Pemberton Hale." She nodded to each. "I understand there's a report of missing property?" "Stolen property," Cord corrected. "Missing until we determine otherwise." Avery turned to Marcus. "And you are?" "Marcus Ellison." "Mr. Ellison, I understand you were near the area where the property was last seen. Would you be willing to speak with me?" "I am." "Is there anything in your pockets that would surprise me?" Marcus paused, looked at Avery, looked at the circle of faces behind her. Vivian, Cord, Barrett, Noel, Cross, Margot Sterling, standing at the back with her arms folded and her emerald earrings catching the garden lights. "There is a wallet in my right jacket pocket and a credit card in my left trouser pocket. Both belong to Margot Sterling. Neither was taken by me." The circle tightened. Cord's body language said, "Told you so." Vivian's expression said victory. Cross's face said judgment rendered. Even Barrett's careful neutrality cracked, her eyes narrowing with something that looked like professional disappointment. "They were placed there," Marcus said, "in 2 separate incidents approximately 40 minutes ago, during physical contact I did not initiate. The wallet was placed in my jacket pocket during a hug at approximately 8:20 p.m. The credit card was placed in my trouser pocket during a second hug at approximately 8:32 p.m. I left both items in place specifically to preserve fingerprint evidence and placement context. I also photographed both items in situ at 8:38 p.m. The metadata on my phone will confirm the timestamp." "Placed there," Avery repeated. Her tone was neutral. Not skeptical, not sympathetic, just recording. "By whom?" "I believe by Noel Pemberton, during a series of hugs and physical contacts that occurred between approximately 8:15 and 8:35 p.m. in the area near the fountain." Every head turned toward Noel. Noel's eyes went wide. Perfect shock. Perfect innocence. The kind of expression that would look convincing on camera and devastating in a courtroom. "That's insane. I would never..." Why would I do that? Marcus, I was being nice to you. I was trying to make you feel welcome. She's right, Vivian stepped forward. Noel was the only one here who was kind to him, and now he's accusing her of, what? Framing him? This is exactly why. She stopped herself. But the sentence wanted to finish itself. This is exactly why we sent him back. Deputy Avery held up a hand. Let me handle this. She turned back to Marcus. I'm going to need to collect those items as evidence. I'll document the chain of custody from this point. Is that acceptable? It is. I'd also request that you note the position of cameras 3 through 7, which should have continuous footage of the fountain area between 8:15 and 8:40 p.m., including the moments when Miss Pemberton was in physical contact with me. Avery studied him. The request was unusual. Specific. The kind of request made by someone who understood evidence collection at a level that exceeded the average person's familiarity with criminal procedure. You seem to know a lot about how this works, Mr. Ellison. I've been in enough rooms where documentation matters. He paused. I'd also like to note for your report that Mr. Cord Pemberton physically seized my left arm on 2 separate occasions, at approximately 6:21 p.m. at the front gate and at approximately 9:08 p.m. in the garden, and forcibly relocated me from the main event area. Both assaults resulted in contusions on my upper left arm and a torn jacket. I'm willing to show you the injuries. He rolled up his sleeve. The bruises were vivid against his brown skin, 2 distinct marks, different shapes, different stages of darkening, consistent with 2 separate incidents of forceful gripping. Avery photographed them with her body camera and her personal phone. Cord's face went from angry to alarmed. Barrett Shaw closed her eyes briefly, the expression of an attorney watching a client's liability compound in real time. Judge Cross stepped forward. Deputy, I've known this family for 30 years. I can vouch for their character. This man is a guest, a former foster child the family took in, and I think we can all agree this is a misunderstanding. With respect, Judge Cross, your personal relationship with the family is exactly the kind of conflict that would require a judge to recuse under 28 U.S.C. Section 455. Marcus's voice was quiet, even. Though that statute applies to federal proceedings, the principle is the same. Your vouching for their character doesn't help. It demonstrates bias. The silence that followed lasted 4 seconds. It was the loudest 4 seconds of the evening. Cross stared at Marcus. Barrett Shaw stared at Marcus. Avery stared at Marcus. Because a former foster child working in administrative government did not cite 28 U.S.C. Section 455 from memory, did not reference recusal standards in casual conversation, did not understand the distinction between federal and state procedural rules with the fluency of someone who navigated them professionally. Barrett's champagne glass trembled almost imperceptibly in her hand. She had spent the evening categorizing Marcus as a puzzle, an unusually articulate man who worked in government and deflected questions with suspicious skill. But this was a different category entirely. This was not deflection, this was expertise. A woman appeared at the edge of the garden circle. She wore the black and white uniform of the catering staff and carried a tray of empty champagne flutes. She was in her late 40s, dark-skinned, with short, natural hair and the careful posture of someone who had learned to be invisible in rooms full of people who preferred not to see her. Her name was Dina Okafor. She had been hired 3 weeks ago by the catering company contracted for tonight's event. Before that, she had spent 2 years working as the Pemberton Legacy Foundation's housing program coordinator, managing the allocation of federally funded housing grants under a community development block grant awarded by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. She had been fired 7 months ago. The official reason was restructuring. The actual reason was that she had filed an internal complaint about the foundation's systematic diversion of HUD grant funds from affordable housing construction into private real estate development for Pemberton family interests, a practice that potentially violated the Fair Housing Act, 42 U.S.C. sections 3604 through 3606, and the terms of the CDBG grant agreement. Her complaint had been filed with HUD. It had been assigned a case number. It had landed on the desk of a federal administrative law judge in Washington, D.C. Dina looked at Marcus. Marcus looked at Dina. And the recognition that passed between them was the kind that happens when two people who have met before, in a very different context, in a very different room, under very different circumstances, suddenly find themselves standing in the same space with none of the protections that their professional roles normally provided. She set down her tray, walked past the circle of guests and deputies and family members, stopped in front of Marcus. "Mr. Ellison," she said it quietly. Not sir, not Marcus. Mr. Ellison, with a formality that didn't match her catering uniform and a deference that didn't match the power dynamics of this garden. Nobody else at this gala had called him Mr. Ellison. He had been Marcus, or the foster child, or the guy at the gate, or young man. Nobody had used the formal address that indicated not friendship or familiarity, but professional respect. The kind of respect given to someone whose title you know and whose authority you recognize, even when neither is visible. Marcus met her eyes, gave a small, almost imperceptible shake of his head. "Not now." Dina nodded, picked up her tray, returned to the service area. On her way past Marcus, she pressed a folded piece of paper into his hand, a motion as subtle and practiced as Noel's wallet insertion, except this one was offered rather than planted, given rather than weaponized. The note, which Marcus would read in his car 40 minutes later, contained 4 words and a room number. Storage room B, cabinets. The exchange lasted 7 seconds. Nobody in the circle understood it. But Barrett Shaw filed it away the same way she filed depositions, carefully, completely, aware that the thing she didn't understand now might be the thing that mattered most later. Deputy Avery collected the wallet and the credit card, documented the chain of custody, noted Marcus's request regarding camera footage, noted his allegation of assault against Cord, noted his physical description of the bruises on his upper arm, which he showed her, documented, photographed, time-stamped. She did not arrest Marcus, did not arrest Cord, did not arrest anyone. She took statements, she took notes, she said she would file a report and that the matter would be reviewed by the investigations unit. "Mr. Ellison, do you wish to file a complaint against Mr. Pemberton for the assaults?" "I wish to document both incidents for the record. Charging decisions are made by the district attorney's office, not by the complainant." Another sentence that didn't belong in the mouth of a former foster child who worked in administrative government. Avery noted it. Cross noted it. Barrett Shaw noted it. Cord noted nothing except his own fury. At 10:14 p.m., Marcus Ellison walked to his car in the gravel parking area, alone. His sport coat was torn at the left shoulder. His arm ached in 2 places where Cord had grabbed him. His right rib still carried a dull throb from the elbow at the gate. His water glass sat abandoned on a table inside the tent, where 200 people were resuming a gala that would continue as if nothing had happened. He passed the service entrance on his way to the parking area. Through the cracked door, he could see the catering staff cleaning, trays being stacked, glassware being packed, the invisible labor that supported the visible luxury. Dina was there, washing dishes at a commercial sink, her hands moving with the automatic efficiency of someone whose mind was elsewhere. She glanced up as he passed. Their eyes met through the gap in the door. She did not smile, did not wave, simply nodded. The nod of someone who understood that the next act of this story would not be performed at a gala or in a garden, but in the quiet procedural spaces where evidence was weighed and decisions were rendered. Marcus nodded back and kept walking. He sat in the driver's seat of his 12-year-old Honda Civic, opened the leather notebook, and for the first time that evening began writing. He wrote in a format that was neither diary nor journal. It was structured, dated, time-stamped. Each entry contained a description of the event, the parties involved, their approximate positions, the applicable legal framework, and a preliminary assessment of evidentiary value. The format was second nature, the same format used in judicial bench memos, the same format he had used in thousands of cases over 11 years. He wrote for 37 minutes, filled 11 pages. The handwriting was small, precise, consistent. the handwriting of someone who had written thousands of similar entries over 11 years, in hundreds of similar situations, from hundreds of similar rooms where people underestimated him. When he finished, he closed the notebook, placed it on the passenger seat, unfolded the note Dina had pressed into his hand. Storage room B. Cabinets. 4 words that might mean nothing. Or might mean that the filing cabinets containing the Pemberton Legacy Foundation's original grant allocation records, records that the foundation claimed had been lost during an office move when HUD investigators requested them 6 months ago, were still in the building, hiding in plain sight. The way evidence often hid, the way Marcus himself had hidden, all evening, in a house that thought it knew everything about him and knew nothing at all. He put the note in the notebook, pulled out his phone and dialed a number from memory. The phone rang twice. "This is Judge Ellison. I need to speak with my senior law clerk, tonight." A pause on the other end. Then Rachel's voice, professional even at 10:50 p.m. "Judge Ellison, what do you need?" "Pull case file HUD-ALJ-2024-0447. First thing Monday morning. Pemberton Legacy Foundation, Chatham County, Georgia." "That's the housing grant diversion case, the one with the whistleblower complaint. We've had it for 8 months." "I know. I need to check something. Specifically, I need to know who the foundation's officers and directors are, and I need to know before I do anything else with that case." "Anything else meaning I may need to recuse." The word sat in the car like a passenger. Recuse. To remove oneself from a case because of conflict of interest. The most procedurally correct response to discovering that the defendants in your case are the family that adopted you, abandoned you, invited you to a gala to humiliate you, planted evidence on you, and assaulted you. Twice. Procedurally correct. Personally devastating. Because recusing meant handing the case to another judge. It meant losing control of the outcome. It meant trusting the system to deliver justice on behalf of the woman in the catering uniform who had risked her career to file a complaint, the same system that had failed Marcus at age 9 when it allowed a family to return a child like a defective product. But Marcus Ellison followed procedure. That was who he was. That was what 11 years on the bench had made him, a person who believed that the rules applied to everyone, including himself, especially when following them, was the hardest thing to do. He would pull the file Monday. He would check the names. And when the names confirmed what he already knew, that the Pemberton Legacy Foundation was run by the Pemberton family, that Vivian Pemberton Hale was listed as executive director, that the charitable organization raising 6 figures at a gala where he was paraded like a rescue animal was the same organization accused of stealing federal housing funds from people who actually needed help, he would file a recusal order under 28 U.S.C. Section 455. And that recusal order, a public document filed in a federal docket accessible to anyone with a PACER account, would contain a detailed disclosure of the conflict of interest, including the fact that the foundation's executive director had publicly identified him as a former foster child at a charity event, including the fact that her husband had physically assaulted him on 2 occasions, including the fact that her sister had placed stolen property in his pockets and filed a false 911 report, including the fact that a witness, the original whistleblower, had been present at the event in a service capacity, terminated from the foundation 7 months earlier for raising the very concerns documented in the case file, including every detail from 11 pages of notes written in a Honda Civic in a gravel parking lot in Savannah, Georgia, at 10:14 p.m. on April 11th. The recusal would not punish the Pembertons directly. That wasn't what recusals did. But it would create a public record that read like an indictment. It would assign the case to a new judge who had no personal connection and no reason for mercy. And it would demonstrate to the HUD Office of Inspector General, to the Department of Justice Civil Division, to the federal monitor who would eventually be appointed to oversee the foundation's compliance, that this case involved a foundation whose leadership had committed assault, evidence tampering, and false reporting against a sitting federal judge. The new judge would read that disclosure, and the new judge would understand exactly what kind of people were running the Pemberton Legacy Foundation. Marcus started the engine, pulled out of the gravel parking area, drove past the gate where Cord had stood 3 hours and 56 minutes earlier, promising him he would leave in the back of a police car. He left in the front seat of his own car, with 11 pages of documentation, with bruises that were evidence, 3 separate incidents of unwanted physical contact, escalating in severity, each one documented with timestamp and location, with a 911 transcript that was evidence, a false report filed by the same woman who had planted stolen property on his person, with phone photographs that were evidence, time-stamped images of items in his pockets before anyone could accuse him of having used them, with 7 cameras worth of footage that was evidence, footage that would show Noel's hands moving to his pockets during embraces engineered for exactly that purpose, with a folded note that pointed to filing cabinets that might contain the original grant records the foundation claimed were lost. He thought about Dina Okafor, about the risk she had taken tonight, working in the same building as the people who had fired her, carrying trays for the same family that had silenced her complaint, pressing a note into the hand of the only person in that room who could do anything about it. The courage required to do that was not the dramatic, cinematic kind. It was the quiet kind, the kind that didn't make noise or draw attention, the kind that showed up in catering uniforms and folded notes and the willingness to stand in a garden and say 2 words, "Mr. Ellison," that told him she knew. She knew who he was. She knew what he could do. And she was asking him, with 2 words and 4 more on a piece of paper, to do it. He would not betray that trust, even if following procedure meant recusing from the case, even if recusing meant the outcome was beyond his control. Because Dina Okafor had already placed her trust in the system once, when she filed her complaint with HUD, and the system had rewarded her with 8 months of silence and a termination. If Marcus recused properly, transparently, with a disclosure that laid bare everything the Pembertons had done, the next judge would inherit not just a case file, but a moral obligation. And moral obligations, in Marcus's experience, were heavier than legal ones. Harder to dismiss. Harder to forget. The kind of weight that followed a judge from the bench to the parking garage, and from the parking garage to the bedroom ceiling at 2 a.m. when sleep wouldn't come, because the right decision and the easy decision were not the same decision, and with the growing, uncomfortable certainty that the Pemberton Legacy Foundation, the charitable organization whose gala he had just attended, whose name was embossed on the invitation still sitting on his passenger seat, was the same organization whose HUD complaint file had been sitting on his desk in Washington for 8 months. Case number HUD-ALJ-2024-0447. Filed by a former housing program coordinator named Dina Okafor, the same woman who had called him Mr. Ellison in a garden full of people who didn't know his name meant anything at all. If you want to find out what happens when the family discovers who Marcus really is, make sure you subscribe and tap that notification bell. The next part of this story will leave you absolutely speechless. Marcus Ellison was not a paper pusher at the DMV, was not an administrator in the vague, dismissible sense that Vivian had assumed, was not the kind of government employee whose title could be mentioned at cocktail parties without anyone needing to change the subject. He was a federal administrative law judge with the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development. He presided over cases involving violations of federal housing law, fraud, discrimination, misuse of federal grant funds, the kinds of violations that carried civil penalties in the millions and criminal referrals to the Department of Justice. And he had just discovered that the family who threw him away like a broken appliance was running a charitable foundation that might be the subject of a case he was assigned to adjudicate. The highway stretched ahead, dark and straight. Savannah's lights faded in the rearview mirror. Behind him, in Savannah, the gala was winding down. Guests were leaving. Cord was pouring himself another bourbon, knuckles still white from the grip that would become Exhibit C in a federal filing. Vivian was reviewing the evening's social media posts, satisfied that the event had been a success. Noelle was deleting the selfies she'd taken with Marcus, erasing him from her phone the way the family had erased him from their lives 25 years ago. Barrett Shaw was the only one not celebrating. She sat in her car in the parking area, engine running, staring at her phone. She had searched Marcus Ellison Federal Government and found nothing. His judicial profile listed only his initials and last name, as was standard for ALJs who presided over cases involving regulatory enforcement. But she had found something else. A reference to a case, HUD-ALJ-2024-0447. In a legal database, listed under the docket of a judge whose initials matched. She closed the browser, opened it again, closed it. Her hands were not quite steady. She would make a phone call Monday morning to the HUD Office of Administrative Law Judges to confirm what she suspected and hoped, desperately, was wrong. She would learn that it was not wrong, and by then, Marcus Ellison would already be drafting the recusal order that would crack the Pemberton Legacy Foundation's facade from foundation to roofline, an order written with the measured precision of a judge, the exhaustive documentation of an investigator, and the cold, patient memory of a 9-year-old boy who had been given a juice box on the worst day of his life and had never forgotten a single detail since. None of them knew. Not yet. But the notebook was full. The evidence was preserved. The cameras had recorded everything. And somewhere on I-16 between Savannah and Macon, a man in a torn sport coat was driving through the Georgia night with the weight of 2 bruises, 11 pages, and 25 years of silence. All of it about to break open, not tonight, not tomorrow, but soon. And when it did, when Barrett Shaw answered the phone on a Monday morning and heard the words Federal Administrative Law Judge and recusal and HUD complaint file, the gala's string quartet and champagne and embossed invitations and white rose arrangements would feel very, very far away. The only sound would be the cracking of a foundation, not the kind built from stone, the kind built from lies. Monday arrived the way Mondays arrive after weekends that change everything. Slowly, with the weight of inevitability and the particular silence of a man sitting at his desk at 7:14 a.m., staring at a case file he had read 6 times in 8 months, but never truly seen until now. The Office of Administrative Law Judges occupied the 4th floor of the Department of Housing and Urban Development's headquarters at 451 7th Street Southwest, Washington, D.C. The building was functional rather than grand. Federal architecture at its most deliberately unmemorable, designed to house process rather than inspire awe. Marcus Ellison's office was a 12 by 14 room with a window facing the courtyard, a government-issued desk, 2 filing cabinets, and a framed copy of the Administrative Procedure Act on the wall that his law clerks had given him as a joke 7 years ago. The joke was that he was the only judge they knew who would actually read the entire act for pleasure. The truth was that he had. Rachel Torres, his senior law clerk, 5 years on his staff, the kind of legal mind that made complex cases navigable, placed the file on his desk at 7:12 a.m. She had arrived early because his call on Saturday night had contained a word she had never heard him use before: recuse. In 5 years, Marcus Ellison had never recused from a case, had never needed to. His personal life was so separated from his professional docket that conflicts of interest were essentially impossible, a consequence of growing up without a family connected to anything, which meant there was no family to create connections that required disclosure. Until now. HUD-ALJ-2024-0447, Rachel said. Pemberton Legacy Foundation, Chatham County, Georgia. Complaint filed August 9th by Dina Okafor, former Housing Program Coordinator. Alleges systematic diversion of community development block. Grant funds from affordable housing construction to private real estate development benefiting foundation officers. Potential violations of 42 U.S.C. sections 3,604 through 3,606 and grant agreement terms. Marcus opened the file, turned past the complaint, past the response filed by the Foundation's counsel, Barrett Shaw of Pemberton and Shaw LLP Savannah, and found what he was looking for: the organizational documents, articles of incorporation, annual reports, the list of officers and directors, Executive Director Vivian Pemberton Hale, Treasurer Cord Pemberton, Secretary Noel Pemberton, Board Chair Judge Hampton Cross, retired. The retirement designation was new. Cross had apparently stepped down from the Chatham County Superior Court bench 3 months ago, which explained his attendance at the gala in a civilian capacity rather than as a sitting judge. But his position as board chair of the foundation meant his involvement was deeper than a golf friendship. He wasn't just a family friend vouching for character in a garden. He was a fiduciary, legally responsible for the foundation's operations, legally exposed if those operations included fraud. Marcus stared at the names. The same names that had surrounded him in a garden 40 hours ago, accusing him of theft. The same people who had dragged him, shoved him, paraded him on stage, and planted stolen property in his pockets. They were the defendants in his case. The case he had been assigned to adjudicate. The case that would determine whether the Pemberton Legacy Foundation had stolen federal housing funds from the people who needed them most. He closed the file. Rachel, draft a recusal order. 28 U.S.C. Section 455, subsection A, impartiality might reasonably be questioned, and subsection B1, personal knowledge of disputed evidentiary facts, full disclosure of the conflict. Rachel sat down across from him. Her pen was ready. Her expression was not. How detailed? Everything. Define everything. The adoption, the relinquishment, the invitation, the gala, the public identification of my foster care history, the physical assaults by Cord Pemberton, 3 incidents, documented with timestamps and photographs, the 911 false report by Noel Pemberton, the planted evidence, wallet and credit card placed in my pockets during staged physical contact, the presence of the complainant, Dina Okafor, at the event in a catering capacity, my personal interaction with Board Chair Hampton Cross, all of it. Rachel's pen stopped moving. She looked up. All of that happened Saturday night? All of that happened Saturday night. And they didn't know who you were. They thought I pushed paper at the DMV. Rachel exhaled slowly, the kind of exhale that carries the weight of understanding something enormous and not yet knowing where to put it. This disclosure is going to be, it's going to read like an indictment. It's going to read like the truth, which is what disclosures are supposed to be. She began writing. Marcus watched her pen move across the legal pad, steady, precise, the way his own handwriting moved across the pages of his leather notebook. He had trained her, and she was good enough to understand that a recusal order was not a weapon. It was a mirror. It showed whoever looked into it exactly what had happened, with no editorial, no embellishment, no mercy. The question was whether the reflection would be survivable. At 9:47 a.m., Barrett Shaw made her phone call. She called the HUD Office of Administrative Law Judges General Line, identified herself as counsel for the Pemberton Legacy Foundation, asked to confirm the identity of the presiding judge in case number HUD-ALJ-202-4-0447. The clerk's response was brief, professional, devastating. That case is assigned to Judge M.R. Ellison. Barrett's voice, when it came back, was stripped of its usual authority. Marcus Ellison? I'm not able to confirm the judge's full first name over the phone, ma'am. You can verify through the PACER docket. She didn't need to verify. She already knew. Had known since Saturday night, sitting in her car with shaking hands and a browser search that pointed toward exactly this answer. She had spent Sunday trying to convince herself she was wrong, had constructed alternate theories, different Ellison, different office, coincidence. None of them held. The man in the gray sport coat, the man who cited 28 U.S.C. Section 455 in casual conversation. The man who narrated his own assault with timestamps and camera positions. The man who understood chain of custody and evidence placement and the difference between filing a complaint and pressing charges. Federal Administrative Law Judge Marcus Ellison. Barrett hung up. Sat at her desk for 11 seconds. She would later estimate the duration because her legal training made her count things, then picked up the phone and dialed Vivian Pemberton Hale. The phone rang 3 times. Vivian answered with the bright, unbothered tone of a woman whose Monday morning had not yet been ruined. "Barrett, how was your weekend? Did you recover from the gala? I think it was our best one yet." "Vivian, listen to me carefully." Barrett's voice had the flat, controlled quality of an attorney delivering bad news, a tone Vivian had heard before in the context of other people's problems. "The man you invited to the gala, Marcus Ellison, he's a federal judge." Silence. Then, "What?" "He's a federal administrative law judge with the Department of Housing and Urban Development, and he is the presiding judge on the HUD complaint filed against the foundation." The silence that followed was different from the garden silence on Saturday night. That silence had lasted 4 seconds. This one lasted 9. And when Vivian spoke again, her voice had lost the brightness the way a lamp loses light when the power cuts, all at once, completely, leaving only the shape of what used to be illuminated. "That's not possible. He works in government, administrative work. He said exactly what he wanted you to hear. He told you the truth without telling you any of it." Barrett paused. Let the next sentence form with the precision it required. "Vivian, Cord assaulted a sitting federal judge, on camera, 3 times. Noel filed a false 911 report about a federal judge and planted stolen property on his person. You publicly disclosed his personal history without consent in front of 200 witnesses and a video system. And Hampton Cross, your board chair, a retired judge, attempted to intervene in a law enforcement matter involving a party to litigation before Judge Ellison's court." "Barrett, what do we, I'm not finished. The HUD case, the Okafor complaint. Judge Ellison has been sitting on it for 8 months. He now has personal knowledge of the foundation's operations, the identity of its officers, the character of its leadership. He's going to recuse, and the recusal order will be a public document. It will contain every detail of what happened Saturday night. Every assault, every false statement, every planted wallet, all of it on the federal record, searchable by anyone with a Pacer account." Vivian's breathing was audible through the phone, shallow, fast. The breathing of a woman whose body understood the danger before her mind had finished processing it. "Can we stop it? The recusal? Can we?" "You cannot stop a judge from filing a recusal order, Vivian. You cannot contact him. You cannot ask him to modify it. Any attempt to influence the content of a judicial filing is obstruction. Do you understand what I'm telling you?" "I understand." "I'm not sure you do, so let me be clearer. You invited a federal judge to your home. You put him on a stage and told 200 people he was a charity case. Your husband grabbed him, shoved him, and dragged him through your garden hard enough to tear his jacket and leave bruises. Your sister called 911 and told the police he was armed. Your sister planted stolen property in his pockets. And your board chair, a retired judge, tried to use his title to pressure a deputy sheriff into treating the victim as a suspect." Barrett paused. "That's not a misunderstanding, Vivian. That's a case study." The call lasted 11 more minutes. Vivian cried for 4 of them, not out of remorse, but out of the particular terror that comes from realizing that the world you built can be dismantled by the people you thought you'd already thrown away. She asked Barrett to fix it. Barrett told her there was nothing to fix because the events had happened, the cameras had recorded them, and the judge had documented everything in a leather notebook with the precision of someone who had been trained to make records that could survive cross-examination. Barrett ended the call with an instruction. "Do not delete any emails. Do not shred any documents. Do not discuss this matter with Cord, Noel, or Hampton Cross except through counsel. And Vivian, do not, under any circumstances, contact Marcus Ellison. Not by phone, not by letter, not through intermediaries. If you do, I will withdraw as your attorney." Vivian hung up, sat in her kitchen, the kitchen where Marcus had once sat on the floor doing homework because the dining room table was for family, and stared at the invitation list for the gala. His name was there, written in her own handwriting, the instrument of her own destruction, composed in calligraphy. Cord arrived home at noon. Vivian told him. His response was not fear. It was rage, the specific defensive rage of a man who has been told that his physical dominance has created legal consequences he cannot punch his way out of. He's a judge? That kid from the foster home is a judge? Federal judge, Cord. HUD. The same agency investigating our foundation. Cord's fist hit the kitchen counter hard enough to crack a ceramic tile. The sound was sharp, like the sound of Marcus's jacket ripping at the shoulder seam, except louder and more expensive. This is ridiculous. He came here to spy on us. He was investigating us at our own party. He was invited, Cord, by me. He didn't know about the case connection until he was already there. At least, that's what the timeline suggests. Barrett had walked Vivian through this. The case had been assigned to Marcus 8 months before the gala. The invitation was sent in March. Marcus arrived in April. He discovered the connection during the event, or shortly after. The timing suggested coincidence, not conspiracy. But coincidence, in this context, was not a defense. It was an accelerant. If you think this story cannot get any more intense, make sure you subscribe and turn on the notification bell, because what happens next will change everything. The Pemberton family's response to Barrett's phone call was immediate, disorganized, and governed by the same instinct that had governed every interaction Marcus had experienced at the gala. The instinct to control the narrative rather than address the facts. Vivian called Cord. Cord called Hampton Cross. Cross called a former colleague at the Georgia bar. The former colleague called a friend at a white shoe firm in Atlanta who had experience with federal regulatory matters. By noon on Monday, 5 attorneys were on a conference call discussing options for a situation that had no good options. The conversation, as Barrett later described it in a sworn deposition, lasted 2 hours and produced 3 proposals. First, contact Judge Ellison directly. Apologize. Frame Saturday night as a misunderstanding. Request that the recusal, if filed, omit the details of the physical encounters. Barrett rejected this immediately. Contacting a judge about a pending case outside of proper channels was an ex parte communication violation. Doing so to influence the content of a judicial filing was obstruction. It would make everything worse. Second, preemptively file a motion to disqualify Judge Ellison from the case, arguing that his personal connection to the foundation created bias. This would give the appearance that the foundation was the party acting in good faith, requesting a neutral judge. Barrett considered this for approximately 90 seconds before rejecting it. The motion would require the foundation to acknowledge the conflict, which meant acknowledging Marcus's identity, the events at the gala, and the fact that the foundation's officers had assaulted the presiding judge. The motion would create the same public record as the recusal, except authored by the foundation, making it look like they were admitting wrongdoing while trying to spin it. Third, do nothing. Wait. Hope that Ellison would recuse quietly, without a detailed disclosure, the way some judges handled conflicts. A 1-paragraph order stating conflict of interest, without specifics. Barrett did not reject this, but she did not endorse it either, because she had spent 3 hours in a garden watching Marcus Ellison document every breath, every camera angle, every second of his mistreatment, with the meticulous discipline of a man who had no intention of being quiet about anything. He's going to write everything down, Barrett said. He already has. I watched him do it. The call ended without resolution. The family retreated into its separate anxieties. Vivian began reviewing the foundation's financial records, something she should have done years ago, and found discrepancies she didn't understand, but that frightened her. Cord poured bourbon and called his divorce attorney because his marriage to Vivian had been strained for years, and assaulting a federal judge seemed like the kind of thing that might accelerate the timeline. Noelle sat in her apartment and stared at the wall, because the full weight of what she had done, the 911 call, the planted wallet, the staged affection designed to create a theft charge against a man she had never met, was beginning to settle on her shoulders like concrete. Hampton Cross said nothing, did nothing, made no calls, wrote no emails. Simply sat in his study in his retired judge house and understood, with the clarity of a man who had spent 30 years on the bench, that the situation was beyond recovery. He opened his desk drawer, pulled out the Pemberton Legacy Foundation's most recent financial report, the one he had signed as board chair without reading carefully, the one that allocated $412,000 in HUD grant funds to property rehabilitation, a category that, upon closer inspection, appeared to include the renovation of 3 residential properties owned by a LLC whose registered agent was Cord Pemberton. Cross read the report, read it again, and understood that his name, Judge Hampton Cross, retired, was attached to financial documents that might constitute federal grant fraud. He poured himself a drink. It did not help. On Wednesday, April 16th, Marcus Ellison filed his recusal order. The order was 12 pages long, single-spaced. It began with the standard procedural language. Pursuant to 28 U.S.C. Section 455A and B.1, the undersigned administrative law judge hereby recuses from case number HUD-ALJ-2024-0447, and then departed from standard with a disclosure section that Rachel Torres would later describe as the most thorough piece of judicial writing I've ever helped draft. The disclosure section was 9 pages. It documented Marcus's adoption by the Pemberton family in 1996, his relinquishment in 1999, the 25 years of no contact, the invitation to the gala, his arrival, the confrontation at the gate, the elbow to his ribs, the public identification of his foster care history, Vivian's speech, the introductions designed to humiliate, the hallway confrontation with Cord Pemberton, the physical shove, the arrival of Noel Pemberton, the planted wallet, the planted credit card, the accusation of theft, Cord's seizure of his lapel, the restraint by Cord's associate, Cord's second forcible seizure and relocation, the torn jacket, the bruises, photographed and appended as exhibits, the interaction with Deputy Sloan Avery, his identification of the planted items, his request for camera footage, the presence of Dina Okafor, the original complainant in the HUD case, at the event in a catering capacity, the exchange of recognition between them, the formal address, Mr. Ellison, that indicated prior professional contact, the involvement of Board Chair Hampton Cross in the garden confrontation, Cross's attempt to vouch for the family and influence the deputy's assessment, Marcus's citation of recusal standards in response, the 911 dispatch log showing Noel Pemberton's false report at 6:22 p.m. Each event was time-stamped. Each participant was identified by full name. Each applicable statute was cited. The tone was not emotional. It was judicial. The same tone Marcus used in opinions, the same precision he applied to findings of fact and conclusions of law. But the precision itself carried emotional weight. The sheer volume of documented mistreatment, laid out in the dry language of judicial disclosure, created a narrative that was more devastating than any accusation, because it didn't accuse. It simply recorded. The order concluded with a single paragraph. The undersigned judge has personal knowledge of disputed evidentiary facts, has been the subject of criminal conduct by officers and directors of the Respondent Foundation, and cannot reasonably be perceived as impartial in this matter. The case is hereby transferred to the Chief Administrative Law Judge for reassignment. All materials referenced in this disclosure, including photographs, dispatch records, and contemporaneous notes, are preserved and available to the reassigned judge, the HUD Office of Inspector General, and any other authority with proper jurisdiction. Rachel filed the order at 2:17 p.m. It appeared on the Pacer docket at 2:23 p.m. By 3 p.m., a legal journalist who monitored HUD enforcement actions had flagged it. By 4 p.m., 2 news outlets had called HUD's Public Affairs Office for comment. By 5 p.m., Barrett Shaw's phone was ringing with a frequency that suggested the universe had decided to collect on debts she didn't know she owed. The story broke on Tuesday, April 22nd, 6 days after the recusal was filed, 11 days after the gala. It was not front-page news. HUD administrative cases rarely attracted mainstream attention, but the details, a federal judge adopted and abandoned by the same family he was assigned to judge. The family inviting him to a gala to humiliate him without knowing who he was. The planted evidence, the assaults, the false 911 call, had the narrative architecture of something that spread. Legal blogs first, then regional outlets, then a national wire service that ran the headline, "Family Abandons Adopted Child, Assaults Him 25 Years Later at Charity Gala, Discovers He's the Federal Judge on Their Case." The headline was oversimplified. Headlines always were. But it contained enough truth to do damage. And the 12-page recusal order, publicly available, precisely written, impossible to dismiss as exaggeration, served as the primary source document for every article that followed. Within 48 hours, the story had accumulated the kind of momentum that institutions cannot control. The Chatham County NAACP issued a statement calling for an investigation into the 911 call. A state representative from Savannah's district, a black woman named Congresswoman Tanya Garrett, posted the recusal order on her official social media account with a single comment. "Read this, all of it." 3 civil rights organizations requested copies of Deputy Avery's incident report through FOIA. 2 law school professors published op-eds analyzing the legal implications of assaulting a judicial officer outside of official proceedings. The Pemberton Legacy Foundation's website went offline on April 23rd. When it returned 3 days later, the Our Team page had been removed. The gala photos had been deleted. The foundation's mission statement, "Committed to uplifting communities through housing, education, and opportunity," remained, but it read differently now. The way all institutional language reads differently when the institution's conduct has been publicly documented. Cord Pemberton was asked to resign from the board of the Savannah Country Club, not expelled, asked. The distinction mattered to the club's membership committee, which preferred the fiction of voluntary departure to the reality of consequences. Cord refused to resign. The committee tabled the matter pending further review, which meant they would wait for the media attention to fade and then pretend the discussion had never happened. Vivian Pemberton Hale was disinvited from 3 charity boards. 2 of them used the word restructuring, the same word that had been used to justify Dina Okafor's termination. The irony was noted by at least one journalist, who included the detail in a profile piece that Vivian's attorney immediately demanded be retracted. The retraction request was denied. The article remained online, accumulating comments that ranged from outraged to darkly amused. Noelle Pemberton deactivated all her social media accounts. She had not been named in the recusal order. Marcus had identified her by her initials, NP, in accordance with judicial convention, but the details were specific enough that anyone familiar with the Pemberton family could identify her. The 911 transcript, obtained by a local news station through a public records request, removed any remaining ambiguity. Her voice was on the recording. Her name was in the dispatch log. Her words, possibly armed, were now part of a public conversation about the weaponization of emergency services against Black Americans. The Pemberton family issued no public statement. Barrett Shaw advised silence. Silence, in her experience, was the only strategy that didn't actively make things worse when everything was already as bad as it could be. Except it wasn't as bad as it could be. Not yet. On April 28th, 17 days after the gala, the case was reassigned. Chief Administrative Law Judge Patricia Reeves, no relation to any party, no connection to Georgia, no history with the Pemberton family or HUD's Southern Regional Office, received the file with a cover memo from Marcus Ellison's chambers that ran 43 pages. The memo included his 11 pages of contemporaneous notes, the photographs of his bruises, the phone time-stamped images of the planted wallet and credit card, a copy of the Chatham County dispatch log, and a summary of the case file's procedural history. Judge Reeves read the memo. Then she read it again. Then she called her law clerk and asked a single question. "Has anyone ever filed a motion for expedited discovery in a case like this?" The law clerk checked the records. No one had. Judge Reeves filed one herself, sua sponte, on the court's own motion. Under the Administrative Procedure Act, ALJs had the authority to manage their dockets with considerable discretion, and Judge Reeves's discretion, informed by a 43-page memo documenting what appeared to be a pattern of obstruction by a respondent foundation whose leadership had physically assaulted the prior presiding judge, pointed toward moving quickly. The expedited discovery order was served on the Pemberton Legacy Foundation on May 2nd. It demanded production of all financial records related to CDBG, grant expenditures from 2020 through 2024, all internal communications regarding the Dina Okafor complaint, all records of property transactions involving foundation officers or affiliated entities, and all personnel records related to Okafor's termination. The order also included a specific demand: all documents currently stored in the Foundation's Savannah office, including but not limited to documents in storage areas, filing cabinets, and archived records. Storage areas, filing cabinets. Barrett Shaw read the order in her office and understood immediately what it meant. The new judge knew about Storage Room B. The new judge knew because Marcus Ellison's recusal disclosure had referenced his interaction with Dina Okafor at the gala, an interaction that, while brief, established that the original complainant had maintained knowledge of the Foundation's documentary record even after her termination. The implication was clear enough for any competent jurist to follow. If Okafor was at the event, and if she had interacted with the presiding judge, then she had likely communicated information about the whereabouts of documents the Foundation claimed were lost. Barrett called Vivian. "The new judge is requesting access to everything in the building, including storage rooms." Vivian's response was immediate. "We should move the—" "Do not finish that sentence." Barrett's voice carried the urgency of an attorney who understood that the next three words out of her client's mouth could constitute obstruction of justice under 18 U.S.C. Section 1519, a federal felony carrying a maximum penalty of 20 years. "Do not move, alter, destroy, or conceal any documents in that building. There is a litigation hold in effect. Any destruction of evidence will be treated as a separate criminal offense. Do you understand me?" Vivian understood. The documents stayed in Storage Room B. The filing cabinets remained where Dina Okafor had organized them 2 years earlier, their contents undisturbed, their labels written in Dina's careful handwriting that would be authenticated during the hearing by a document examiner who confirmed that the labels matched Dina's known writing samples and that the records appeared unaltered. Cord Pemberton did not understand, or chose not to. 3 days after the discovery order was served, Barrett received a call from the Foundation's office manager reporting that Cord had appeared at the building with a moving truck requesting access to clean out some old files. The office manager, a woman named Grace Linden, who had worked for the Foundation for 9 years and who understood, with the practical intelligence of someone who had survived multiple management crises, that cooperating with a moving truck 3 days after a federal subpoena was the legal equivalent of lighting a fuse, refused to open the storage room and called Barrett instead. Barrett called Cord. The conversation lasted 4 minutes. She used the word criminal 7 times, the word obstruction 5 times, and the phrase, "Do you want to go to prison?" twice. Cord returned the moving truck to the rental company. The Storage Room B documents remained untouched. Dina Okafor, reading a copy of the order forwarded by her attorney, smiled for the first time in 7 months. She knew what was in Storage Room B. She had put it there herself 2 years earlier when she organized the Foundation's original grant allocation files, the files that showed, line by line, how federal housing funds designated for affordable construction were redirected to properties owned by Cord Pembertons LLC. The files that the Foundation told HUD investigators had been lost during an office relocation. The files had not been lost. They had been forgotten, because the people who wanted them gone assumed that firing the woman who organized them was sufficient to erase their existence. They hadn't counted on Dina returning as a caterer. They hadn't counted on her pressing a note into a judge's hand. and they hadn't counted on the judge being the same abandoned child whose face had once looked up from a SpongeBob backpack at a family that decided he wasn't worth keeping. If this story is making your heart race, you are not alone. Subscribe now and tap that notification bell so you do not miss a single twist. The hearing was scheduled for June 9th, 8 weeks after the gala, 5 weeks after the expedited discovery order. The timeline was aggressive by administrative law standards. Most HUD cases took 12 to 18 months to reach hearing, but Judge Reeves had made a determination that the circumstances warranted acceleration, and Barrett Shaw's motion to extend the discovery period, arguing that the Foundation needed additional time to locate and organize records, was denied with a 2-sentence order that Barrett would remember for the rest of her career. The respondent has had 8 months since the initial complaint to produce these records. The court declines to reward delay with additional delay. The hearing took place at the HUD regional office in Atlanta, neutral ground, 2 hours from Savannah, far enough from the Pemberton estate to strip the family of home field advantage. The hearing room was small, windowless, and aggressively functional. A conference table, 2 microphones, a court reporter, Judge Reeves at the head of the table wearing reading glasses, and the expression of a woman who had been doing this work for 22 years and had seen every variation of institutional misconduct that the American nonprofit sector could produce. Dina Okafor testified first. She sat across from Barrett Shaw, who would conduct the cross-examination, and spoke with the measured clarity of someone who had been waiting 7 months to say what she was about to say. Her direct testimony lasted 2 hours. She described the Foundation's operations from the inside, the grant applications she had helped write, the budget allocations she had helped manage, the moment she realized that the numbers on paper didn't match the buildings on the ground. Affordable housing units that were supposed to be built with federal funds and weren't. Renovation contracts awarded to a company called Lowland Holdings LLC, whose registered agent, she discovered through a public records search, was Cord Pemberton. "I brought it to Ms. Pemberton Hale's attention on February 14th of last year," Dina said. Her voice was steady. Her hands were still. "I showed her the discrepancy between the grant allocation report and the actual construction expenditures. I showed her the Lowland Holdings invoices. I asked her to explain why federal housing funds were being used to renovate properties owned by her husband's company." "And what was her response?" asked the HUD enforcement attorney, a woman named Sonia Alvarez, who had been assigned to the case after the reassignment, and who approached her work with the relentless thoroughness of someone who believed that housing fraud was a crime against the people who needed housing most. "She told me that the allocation decisions were made at the board level and that my role was to implement, not to question." Dina paused. "Then she told me that the Foundation was restructuring and that my position was being eliminated." "How long after your conversation was your position eliminated?" 11 days. The number sat in the hearing room like a dropped stone. 11 days between raising a concern about financial fraud and losing the job. Even Barrett Shaw, whose professional obligation was to defend the Foundation, did not attempt to argue that 11 days was coincidental. She had advised Vivian at the time that the termination timeline was legally dangerous. Vivian had not listened. Barrett's cross-examination was professional but constrained. She challenged Dina's qualifications to interpret financial documents. Dina held a master's degree in public administration from Savannah State University and had worked in nonprofit finance for 14 years. She questioned whether Dina had followed proper internal complaint procedures. Dina had documented every step, including 3 emails to Vivian and 1 to Hampton Cross, all of which she had preserved on a personal device before her company email was deactivated on the day of her termination. "Ms. Okafor, isn't it true that you filed your HUD complaint after being terminated? That your complaint was motivated by resentment rather than genuine concern?" Dina looked at Barrett. "I filed my HUD complaint because I watched federal money designated for people who needed affordable housing get redirected to renovate properties that would be rented at market rate to people who didn't. The timing of my complaint, after my termination, reflects the fact that I was afraid to file it while I was still employed, because the 11-day timeline between my internal report and my firing made it clear what happened to people at the Pemberton Foundation who asked inconvenient questions. Barrett had no follow-up. There was no follow-up that would improve the Foundation's position. Dina's answer was not dramatic. It was precise, and precision, in an administrative hearing, was more damaging than drama. The Storage Room B documents were introduced as Exhibit 14 through Exhibit 29, 16 files, 342 pages of original grant allocation records that the Foundation had told HUD were lost. The records showed, with line item specificity, the movement of funds from affordable housing construction accounts to Lowland Holdings LLC accounts over a 4-year period. Total diverted funds, $1,218,000. Barrett objected to the admission of the documents on chain of custody grounds. The records had been stored in a room accessible to multiple staff members, and their authenticity could not be independently verified. Judge Reeves overruled the objection. The documents bore the Foundation's letterhead, matched the formatting of other authenticated records, and were consistent with the financial discrepancies identified in Dina's complaint. Their evidentiary weight would be determined after full review, but they were admissible. Vivienne Pemberton Hale testified on the second day of the hearing. She was represented by Barrett and accompanied by a second attorney, a partner from the Atlanta white shoe firm that Hampton Cross's contact had recommended. The second attorney, a man named Sterling Graves, had been practicing federal regulatory law for 28 years and understood, within the first 15 minutes of Vivienne's testimony, that this case was not going to end well for his client. Vivienne's testimony was careful, rehearsed. Every answer filtered through the language Barrett and Graves had prepared. To the best of my recollection, I would need to review the records. I relied on the guidance of our board and financial advisors. She denied knowledge of the fund diversion, denied that Dina's termination was retaliatory, denied that the Foundation's failure to produce the Storage Room B documents was deliberate concealment. She wore a navy suit, no jewelry, hair pulled back, the costume of a woman trying to look serious rather than wealthy, a distinction that Barrett had coached her on for 2 hours the night before. "You are not attending a gala," Barrett had told her. "You are explaining to a federal judge why $1.2 million in housing funds went to your husband's real estate company instead of to the affordable housing projects they were designated for. Dress accordingly." Vivienne had not appreciated the instruction, but she had followed it. Sonia Alvarez's cross-examination dismantled each denial with the patience of someone removing bricks from a wall. "Ms. Pemberton Hale, you testified that you relied on the guidance of your board. Who chaired the board during the period in question?" "Judge Hampton Cross." "Retired Judge Cross is also a personal friend of your family, is that correct?" "He was a friend of my late father's." "Yes." "And retired Judge Cross signed the Foundation's annual financial reports as board chair, is that correct?" "Yes." "Did he review the grant allocation records before signing?" Vivienne hesitated. The hesitation was brief, perhaps 2 seconds, but in a hearing room where every syllable was recorded, 2 seconds was an eternity. "I believe he reviewed summary documents." "Summary documents, not the detailed allocation records that Ms. Okafor organized and stored in your Foundation's filing cabinets?" I'm not certain what level of detail he reviewed." "Ms. Pemberton Hale, the detailed records, the ones your Foundation told HUD investigators were lost during an office relocation, were found in a storage room in your own building. Can you explain how documents can be lost in a building you own?" Barrett objected. Argumentative. Judge Reeves sustained the objection, but noted for the record that the question of the document's availability would be addressed in findings. Alvarez shifted direction. "Ms. Pemberton Hale, let's discuss the Lowland Holdings invoices. I'm showing you Exhibit 22, an invoice from Lowland Holdings LLC to the Pemberton Legacy Foundation, dated March 15, 2022, in the amount of $147,000. The invoice is for, and I quote, Property Rehabilitation Services, Phase 2. Can you describe what Phase 2 involved?" Vivienne looked at the document, looked at Barrett, looked at Graves. Neither attorney could answer for her. I would need to review the project files to provide specific details. The project files are Exhibit 23. They show that Phase 2 involved the renovation of a residential property at 414 Drayton Street, Savannah. Public records, Exhibit 24, show that 414 Drayton Street is owned by Lowland Holdings, LLC, and the registered agent of Lowland Holdings, LLC, Exhibit 25, is your husband, Cord Pemberton. Alvarez paused. Let the chain of documents speak. Ms. Pemberton Hale, did you know that the foundation was paying your husband's company to renovate properties that your husband's company owned? I relied on the guidance of your board. Yes, you've said that. Alvarez's tone was not aggressive. It was tired. The tiredness of an attorney who had heard the same deflection from the same kind of witness in the same kind of case enough times to know that the deflection was not a defense. It was an admission wearing a disguise. Let me rephrase. Did you benefit financially from the renovation of 414 Drayton Street? I don't. The property was listed for rent in June 2022 at $3,200 per month. The rental income flows to Lowland Holdings, LLC, of which your husband is the sole member. You filed joint tax returns with your husband during the relevant period. Did you benefit financially? Vivian's composure fractured. Not dramatically. She didn't cry, didn't shout, didn't storm out of the hearing room. But the fracture was visible in the way her hands gripped the edge of the table, knuckles whitening, the same gesture Cord had used when he gripped the gate on the night of the gala. The family resemblance was not genetic. It was behavioral, the shared instinct to hold on to things when control was slipping away. On advice of counsel, I declined to answer that question. Barrett stood. My client is invoking her Fifth Amendment right. This is an administrative hearing, Ms. Shaw, not a criminal proceeding. Judge Reeves's voice was level, patient. The Fifth Amendment applies, but the court may draw adverse inferences from a respondent's refusal to testify in a civil matter. That inference will be noted in my findings. Vivian invoked the Fifth Amendment 6 more times before her testimony concluded. Each invocation was recorded by the court reporter. Each one added another weight to the scale that was tilting, slowly and irreversibly, against the Pemberton Legacy Foundation. During a recess between sessions, Cord Pemberton, who had been sitting in the back of the hearing room despite Barrett's explicit instruction to stay away, approached Dina Okafor in the hallway. He did not touch her, did not raise his voice. But he stood close enough that Dina could smell his cologne, the same cologne Marcus had smelled in the garden, and spoke with the quiet menace of a man who had not yet learned that proximity to power was not the same as possession of it. You should have stayed in the kitchen, Dina. Dina looked up at him. She was 5'4". Cord was 6'3". The height differential was extreme enough to qualify as its own form of intimidation. A physical architecture of dominance that Cord used the way he used every physical advantage, instinctively and without conscience. Is that a threat, Mr. Pemberton? It's advice. Your advice got me fired. I'll pass. She stepped around him and walked back toward the hearing room. Cord's hand twitched at his side, the same hand that had grabbed Marcus's lapel, that had shoved Marcus into a wall, that had dragged Marcus through a garden. But he did not reach out. Because Sonia Alvarez was standing 12 feet away, watching, and even Cord Pemberton understood that assaulting a second witness in a federal case would cross a line that his attorney could not uncross. Alvarez made a note. The note would appear in a supplemental filing submitted to Judge Reeves the following week, documenting an apparent attempt at witness intimidation by a foundation officer during a scheduled hearing recess. Judge Reeves would reference the incident in her decision, not as a finding of fact, but as additional context for the court's assessment of the Foundation's institutional culture. The same institutional culture that had invited a man to a party to humiliate him and then assaulted him when he refused to be humiliated. The hearing continued for a third day. Cord Pemberton was called as a witness regarding Lowland Holdings, LLC. He arrived with his own attorney, separate from Vivian's, a man named Douglas Keene, who specialized in white-collar defense and who charged $600 an hour because his clients could afford it, and because the alternative was a public defender who could not protect them from themselves. Cord wore a suit. He had been instructed not to speak unless spoken to, not to make eye contact with Dina Okafor, and under no circumstances to display the physical aggression that had defined his behavior at the gala. He followed the first instruction for approximately 12 minutes. When Sonia Alvarez asked him to confirm that he was the sole member of Lowland Holdings LLC, Cord confirmed. When she asked him to describe the company's business activities, Cord stated that Lowland Holdings was a real estate investment company focused on property rehabilitation in the greater Savannah area. When she asked him how many properties Lowland Holdings had rehabilitated using Pemberton Legacy Foundation funds, Cord looked at Keene. Keene leaned in and whispered. Cord cleared his throat. On advice of counsel, I decline to answer that question on the grounds that my answer may tend to incriminate me. He invoked his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination in response to every substantive question about the LLC's financial transactions after that. 14 questions, 14 invocations, each one recorded by the court reporter with the mechanical efficiency of someone who had recorded Fifth Amendment refusals before and understood that each one was, in its own way, an answer. After the seventh invocation, Alvarez changed her approach. She stopped asking about Lowland Holdings and began asking about the gala. Mr. Pemberton, on the evening of April 11th, did you physically prevent a guest from entering the Pemberton estate? Keene objected. Outside the scope of the proceeding, Judge Reeves overruled. The respondent's treatment of individuals, including the prior presiding judge, is relevant to the court's assessment of the Foundation's institutional culture. Cord looked at Keene. Keene shook his head slowly. On advice of counsel, I decline to answer. Mr. Pemberton, did you seize a guest's jacket on the evening of April 11th and tear it? On advice of counsel, I decline to answer. Did you drag a guest through the garden area against his will? On advice of counsel. Cord's voice cracked, not from emotion. From the strain of sitting in a hearing room answering the same 4 words to questions about things he had done with his own hands, things he could feel in the muscles of his arms, things that were recorded on cameras whose footage was sitting in an evidence folder 3 feet from his elbow. I declined to answer. Judge Reeves did not compel testimony. She noted the invocations, she noted the pattern, and she noted, in a bench comment that Barrett Shaw would later cite as evidence of judicial bias in a motion that would ultimately fail, that the respondent's treasurer has declined to answer questions about both the financial transactions at issue in this proceeding and his physical conduct toward the prior presiding judge. The court will draw appropriate inferences from both sets of refusals. The hearing concluded on June 11th. Judge Reeves announced that she would issue her decision within 90 days. The standard timeline for HUD administrative proceedings. She issued it in 47. The decision was 26 pages. It found the Pemberton Legacy Foundation liable for systematic diversion of CDBG grant funds in violation of 42 U.S.C. sections 3604 through 3606 and the terms of the Foundation's grant agreement. It found that the termination of Dina Okafor was retaliatory and violated HUD's whistleblower protection provisions. It ordered the Foundation to repay $1,218,000 in diverted funds. It imposed a civil penalty of $300,000. It barred the Foundation from receiving future HUD grants for a period of 5 years, and it referred the matter to the HUD Office of Inspector General for investigation of potential criminal conduct, including false statements to federal investigators regarding the lost documents. The decision also contained a footnote, footnote 12, on page 19, that would become the most cited footnote in HUD administrative law for the next 3 years. It read, "The court notes that the prior presiding judge recused from this matter after discovering that the Foundation's officers had physically assaulted him, planted stolen property on his person, and filed a false emergency report against him at a charity event to which he had been invited. While these events are not part of the evidentiary record in this proceeding, they are part of the public record and are referenced here to provide context for the court's assessment of the Foundation's institutional culture and its treatment of individuals it perceives as vulnerable. Footnote 12 was not legally necessary. It was not part of the findings of fact or the conclusions of law. It was an observation, the kind of observation that judges sometimes made when the record before them suggested a pattern that extended beyond the specific violations at issue. The observation was devastating, not because it accused the Pembertons of anything new, but because it connected two separate narratives, the fraud and the gala, into a single portrait of a family that treated people as instruments of their convenience, to be used, displayed, discarded, and attacked when they stopped being useful. Barrett Shaw filed a motion for reconsideration. It was denied. She filed an appeal to the HUD secretary. The appeal was pending as of September, with no projected resolution date. Appeals in administrative cases typically took 18 to 24 months. Meanwhile, the parallel consequences accumulated like interest on a debt. The Chatham County District Attorney's Office, acting on Deputy Sloan Avery's incident report from April 11th, filed misdemeanor battery charges against Cord Pemberton under Georgia Code Section 16-5-23. Cord's attorney negotiated a plea that reduced the charge to disorderly conduct, resulting in a $500 fine and 12 months of probation. The plea deal was standard for a first-offense misdemeanor involving a defendant with no prior record and the resources to hire effective counsel. It was not justice exactly, but it was a record, a criminal record that would follow Cord Pemberton through every background check, every loan application, every professional licensing inquiry for the rest of his life. Noel Pemberton was not charged with filing a false police report. The district attorney's office reviewed the 911 dispatch log and concluded that while Noel's description of Marcus as possibly armed was inaccurate, it did not meet the evidentiary threshold for a false report charge under Georgia Code Section 1610-26, which required proof that the caller knew the report was false at the time it was made. Noel's defense, that she genuinely believed Marcus was an unauthorized intruder, was difficult to disprove, even though the invitation in his hand and the phone call Cord made to Vivian suggested otherwise. The 911 call remained on the public record. Its contents, the racial description, the unfounded claim of a weapon, the fact that the caller was the same person who had signed the invitation, would be cited in 3 subsequent academic papers on the phenomenon of weaponized emergency calls and their disproportionate impact on Black Americans. Hampton Cross resigned from the Pemberton Legacy Foundation's board of directors on July 15th. He issued no public statement. His attorney, the same former colleague he had called on that Monday after the gala, sent a letter to the foundation's remaining board members stating that Cross was stepping down to avoid the appearance of conflict. The letter did not address the question of whether Cross had reviewed the financial reports he had signed, or whether his failure to do so constituted a breach of fiduciary duty under Georgia nonprofit governance law. The Georgia State Bar opened a preliminary inquiry into Cross's conduct, not as a judge, since he had retired, but as a licensed attorney serving in a fiduciary capacity for an organization accused of federal grant fraud. The inquiry was ongoing as of September. Its outcome was uncertain. Cross's attorney described it as routine. Routine in the way that dental surgery is routine, technically accurate but insufficient to convey the discomfort. Barrett Shaw was not disciplined, not investigated, not sanctioned. She had represented her client within the bounds of professional ethics, had not participated in the fraud, and had not known about the fund diversion until the Storage Room B documents surfaced. But her firm, Pemberton and Shaw LLP, lost 3 clients in the weeks following the news coverage. Clients who decided that a law firm whose name included Pemberton was not the firm they wanted associated with their own legal matters. Barrett considered changing the firm's name, had not yet decided. If you want to know how Marcus's story ends, and the one secret that has not yet been revealed, make sure you are subscribed with notifications on. You will not want to miss this. Dina Okafor was offered reinstatement by the Foundation's interim management, a court-appointed monitor who had been assigned to oversee the Foundation's operations during the appeal period. She declined. She had accepted a position as a housing policy analyst with the Georgia Department of Community Affairs, a state agency that oversaw CDBG grant distribution. The salary was lower, the commute was longer, but the work was the same work she had always done, connecting federal resources to people who needed housing, except now she did it for an employer that wouldn't fire her for pointing out when the money went to the wrong address. Marcus Ellison returned to his docket. He had 47 other cases pending. The Pemberton matter was no longer his, had never been his in a sense. The recusal had ensured that his involvement ended the moment it began, that his personal history would not contaminate the legal process, that the outcome would be determined by evidence and procedure rather than by the memory of a 9-year-old boy standing on a landing with a SpongeBob backpack. He followed the case through public filings, read Judge Reeves's decision when it was published, read footnote 12, read it twice, closed the file. The personal cost of the recusal was something Marcus did not discuss with anyone, not Rachel, not his colleagues on the bench, not the few friends who had read the news coverage and called to ask if he was okay. The cost was not professional. His docket continued. His reputation among fellow ALJs was, if anything, enhanced. Recusal was respected in the judicial community as an act of integrity, and the thoroughness of his disclosure was cited approvingly in 2 Bar Journal articles. The cost was personal. The cost was the knowledge that the family who had thrown him away was stealing from the people he had spent his career protecting, people who needed affordable housing, people whose applications and complaints and appeals crossed his desk every week, people whose lives were shaped by the same systems that had shaped his. The foster homes he'd lived in after the Pembertons returned him, 3 of them in 4 years before he aged out of the system at 18, had been subsidized by the same federal programs the Pembertons were defrauding. The apartments he'd rented during college and law school had been found through the same housing databases that CDBG funds were supposed to populate with affordable options. The connection was not abstract, it was biographical, and the recusal meant stepping away from the one case where his biography and his authority intersected, where his understanding of what it meant to need housing was not just empathy, but experience. He stepped away anyway, because the law required it, because procedure mattered more than satisfaction, because a judge who bent the rules to pursue personal justice was not a judge at all, was just another person using institutional power to serve private interests, which was exactly what the Pembertons had done. The irony was not lost on him. It was simply absorbed, filed, added to the collection of ironies that constituted his relationship with a family that had given him their name, their home, and their indifference, in that order. He did not contact the Pembertons, did not issue a statement, did not participate in any media coverage. When a reporter from the Savannah Morning News called his chambers requesting an interview, Rachel Torres declined on his behalf with a single sentence. Judge Ellison's recusal order speaks for itself. It did. 12 pages. 9 of them filled with the precise, documented record of a single evening in a garden. Speaking for itself. Speaking for him. Speaking for every person who had ever stood in a room full of people who assumed they knew the whole story and understood nothing at all. A letter arrived at his office 3 weeks after the decision was published. Handwritten, no return address, postmarked Savannah. He opened it. The handwriting was unfamiliar, angular, careful, the writing of someone who had taken time with each word. Dear Judge Ellison, you won't remember me, but I was at the gala. I was the woman in the pearl necklace who told you that you must be so grateful. I have thought about that moment every day since I read your recusal order. I didn't know who you were. I didn't know what the family had done to you. I didn't know what the foundation was doing with the grant money. I didn't know any of it, and I realize now that not knowing was a choice. I chose not to look. I chose to assume. I chose to believe that gratitude was the only emotion a person in your position could reasonably feel. I was wrong. I am writing to tell you that I was wrong, and that I am sorry, and that your forward answer to my question, for what specifically, has changed the way I think about every assumption I've ever made about people whose lives I imagined I understood. I don't expect a response. I just wanted you to know. Sincerely, Margaret Boone. Marcus read the letter, folded it, placed it in the desk drawer next to the leather notebook. He did not respond to Margaret Boone either. But he kept her letter, because it was evidence of something he rarely encountered in his professional life, evidence that people could change, that assumptions could be examined, that the question, for what, specifically, could travel from a gala in Savannah to a woman's conscience and arrive as something different from what it had been when he spoke it. Small evidence, but evidence. And Marcus Ellison believed in evidence the way some people believed in redemption, completely, professionally, and with the understanding that its meaning was determined not by the person who collected it, but by the person who chose to act on it. On a Friday evening in September, 5 months after the gala, Marcus sat in his apartment in Washington. The apartment was small, clean, organized with the same meticulous attention he brought to his case files. The leather notebook sat on the kitchen table, open to the last page he had used. The 11 pages from April 11th were still there, filled with small handwriting that recorded the worst evening of his adult life, with the clinical detachment of a man trained to separate what he felt from what he documented. He picked up the notebook. Read the first entry. 6:18 p.m. Arrival at Pemberton Estate, Savannah, Georgia. Confrontation at gate with Cord Pemberton. Physical obstruction of passage. Elbow contact to right rib cage. He read all 11 pages. Then he closed the notebook, put it in the desk drawer, poured a glass of water, not bourbon, never bourbon, water, and sat by the window where the last of the September light was fading over the rooftops of a city that had nothing to do with Savannah, Georgia. His phone buzzed. A text message from a number he didn't recognize. Georgia area code, 912. He opened it. Marcus, it's Noel. I didn't know about the foundation. About the money. I didn't know any of it. I just did what Vivian told me to do. She said you would embarrass us. She said we needed to make sure you left before you caused problems. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Can we talk? Marcus read the message, read it again, set the phone on the table, did not reply. He thought about the wallet in his pocket, the burgundy Kate Spade, the $160, the credit card planted in a separate pocket during a separate hug, the systematic, premeditated construction of a false theft charge designed to humiliate him in front of 200 people and remove him from a property that his family had once told him was his home. Noelle was sorry. She didn't know about the foundation. She just did what Vivian told her to do. Marcus believed her, on both counts. And neither count changed what had happened. Because I didn't know was not innocence. It was the particular kind of ignorance that privilege cultivates. The ability to not know things that would be inconvenient to know. The ability to follow instructions without asking what the instructions served. The ability to destroy someone's dignity as a favor to a sister and then apologize when the consequences arrived. He did not reply, not that night. Not the next morning, not the next week. The phone sat on the table. The message sat on the screen. The question, "Can we talk?" sat in the space between a woman who wanted absolution and a man who was not certain he had it to give. Some questions don't get answered. Some conversations don't get had. Some families break in ways that apologies can't mend, because the break didn't happen at the gala. It happened 25 years earlier, on a warm Tuesday in April, when a 12-year-old girl stood at the top of a staircase and told a 9-year-old boy that he wasn't really theirs. Everything after that was just the fracture propagating. Slowly, through load-bearing walls, until the whole structure came down. On the same Friday evening, 3 things happened that Marcus did not yet know about. First, the HUD Office of Inspector General opened a formal criminal investigation into the Pemberton Legacy Foundation's financial reporting. The investigation, assigned case number OIG-2024-CR-0891, would focus on the Foundation's representations to federal investigators that grant allocation records had been lost, representations that the Storage Room B discovery had rendered demonstrably false. false statements to federal investigators constituted a violation of 18 U.S.C. Section 1001, carrying a maximum penalty of 5 years imprisonment. The investigation was assigned to a special agent named Terrence Holt, no relation to any party, who had spent 11 years investigating nonprofit fraud and who would later describe the Pemberton case as one of the most straightforward false statement cases I've ever seen, because they lied about documents that were sitting in a room in their own building. The investigation's timeline was uncertain. Federal criminal investigations moved at their own pace. Months of grand jury proceedings, document review, witness interviews, and the slow accumulation of evidence sufficient to convince a prosecutor that charges would result in conviction. Agent Holt estimated 18 to 24 months before a charging decision. Barrett Shaw estimated longer. Neither estimate was wrong. Both were a reminder that justice, when it arrived slowly, and that the people who needed it most were usually the people who could least afford to wait. Second, Deputy Sloan Avery filed a supplemental report with the Chatham County Sheriff's Office regarding the events of April 11th. The supplemental report included the security camera footage from the Pemberton estate, obtained through a subpoena served on the Foundation's security company, which showed, with unambiguous clarity, the following. Noelle Pemberton, embracing Marcus Ellison near the fountain at 8:20 p.m., her left hand moving to his jacket pocket and depositing an object. Noelle Pemberton, embracing Marcus Ellison again at 8:32 p.m., her forearm pressing against his trouser pocket. Cord Pemberton grabbing Marcus Ellison's lapel at 9:03 p.m., an unidentified male restraining Marcus Ellison's arms from behind at 9:04 p.m., and Cord Pemberton seizing Marcus Ellison's left arm and dragging him toward the service entrance at 9:08 p.m., with visible tearing of the jacket fabric. The footage was preserved under an evidence hold. Its implications for Noelle's potential criminal exposure, filing a false 911 report, planting evidence, were noted in Avery's supplement but not acted upon, because the district attorney's office had already declined to prosecute based on the available evidence. The footage might change that calculation, or it might not. Avery filed it and moved on to her next case. She had 47 open files. The Pemberton matter was important, but importance did not determine priority in a county sheriff's office with limited resources and competing demands. Third, a man named Jerome Osei, a forensic accountant retained by the HUD Enforcement Division as a consultant on the Pemberton case, completed his preliminary analysis of the Foundation's financial records. His report, which would not be submitted to Judge Reeves until the appeal was resolved, identified an additional $319,000 in questionable expenditures that had not been included in the original complaint. The expenditures involved a second LLC, Coastal Heritage Properties, whose registered agent was not Cord Pemberton, but an individual identified only by initials. H.C. Hampton Cross. Board chair. Retired judge. Family friend. The man who had signed the financial reports without reading them, or perhaps having read them very carefully indeed, the initials were noted in Osei's report. They would be investigated. They would lead to questions about Cross's knowledge, his involvement, his benefit from the Foundation's operations. Questions that a retired judge sitting in a study with a glass of bourbon already knew were coming, but did not yet know when they would arrive. The investigation was preliminary. The evidence was circumstantial. The outcome was uncertain. But the questions were on paper now. And paper, in Marcus Ellison's experience, was patient. It waited. It accumulated. And eventually, it weighed enough to move even the heaviest stones. 2 weeks later, Barrett Shaw received an email. The sender used an encrypted address that routed through 3 proxy servers. Barrett's firm's IT consultant would later determine that the origin was untraceable without a federal subpoena, which no one had reason to file because the email's content was not, strictly speaking, evidence of a crime. It was evidence of a pattern. The email contained a single attachment, a spreadsheet. 47 rows. Each row represented a nonprofit foundation in the state of Georgia that had received CDBG funds through HUD between 2018 and 2024. Each row contained 3 columns: the foundation's name, the amount of CDBG funds received, and a percentage labeled allocation discrepancy. The Pemberton Legacy Foundation was row 31. Its allocation discrepancy was listed as 34%. 46 other foundations were listed. 23 of them showed discrepancy percentages above 15%, the threshold that HUD investigators used to flag potential fund diversion. The email's body contained one sentence: Pemberton wasn't the only one. Barrett read the email 3 times, forwarded it to her personal archive, deleted it from her work inbox, sat at her desk with her hands flat on the surface and her eyes closed, because the sentence, 4 words, no signature, no context, told her everything she needed to know about the scope of what Dina Okafor's complaint had uncovered. The Pemberton case was not an isolated incident. It was a symptom. One foundation among dozens, one family among many. Family. One set of grant funds diverted from one set of people who needed housing to one set of people who didn't. Multiplied across a state, possibly across a region, possibly across the country. Dina Okafor had pulled a single thread, and the fabric was still unraveling. Barrett did not forward the email to the Pemberton family, did not report it to HUD, did not do anything with it, because doing something would require her to acknowledge its existence, and acknowledging its existence would require her to make decisions about her obligations as an attorney and her responsibilities as a human being, and those 2 sets of obligations were not, at this particular moment, pointing in the same direction. The email sat in her personal archive, waiting. The spreadsheet sat in a folder labeled MISC. The 46 other foundations sat in their respective communities, receiving federal money, filing their reports, renovating their properties, continuing their operations without any awareness that a former housing program coordinator in Savannah had started a process that might eventually reach them. Might. Eventually. The words of institutional change, slow, uncertain, dependent on the willingness of people in positions of authority to look at uncomfortable information and decide that looking was more important than not looking. Marcus Ellison had looked, had filed his recusal, had stepped aside and let the system work. Judge Reeves had looked, had issued her decision, had written footnote 12. Dina Okafor had looked, had lost her job, had returned to the building in a catering uniform, had pressed a note into a judge's hand. The system was working, slowly, imperfectly. The way systems always worked when the people inside them chose to look. In Savannah, the Pemberton estate was quiet. The gala tents had been taken down weeks ago. The string quartet had been paid and forgotten. The white roses had died the Wednesday after the event, as predicted. The security cameras, all 7 of them, continued recording, their footage now preserved under a federal litigation hold that prevented deletion for a minimum of 3 years. Somewhere in Storage Room B, the filing cabinets stood empty. Their contents had been subpoenaed, copied, entered into evidence, and were now part of a federal administrative record that would outlast every person who had tried to make them disappear. And somewhere on the Pemberton estate grounds, 3 inches underground near the base of an oak tree, a toy soldier waited, buried by a 7-year-old boy who wanted to leave something permanent in a place where nothing about his presence had been allowed to last. The soldier was still there, rusted now, covered in 27 years of Georgia clay, forgotten by everyone except the man who had buried it, a man who remembered everything, wrote everything down, and understood that some things you bury come back. Not as the thing you buried, as something harder, something that the people who thought they could throw you away never expected you to become. The notebook was closed. The case was reassigned. The foundation was cracking. But the spreadsheet in Barrett Shaw's archive had 46 more rows. And this story, this particular fracture in this particular foundation, was only the beginning.
Thank you for taking the time to watch this video today. If you found the content helpful, please remember to like and subscribe so you won't miss our upcoming episodes. If you have any questions or suggestions, feel free to leave a comment below. We are always here to listen.